And welcome to ITC and Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hernandez, with the co-host, Joshua Sean.
Good evening. How is everyone?
And then we have a special guest tonight, Craig Owens, author, an all-around amazing guy.
No, thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, no problem. So yeah, tonight we're gonna talk a little bit about the paranormal with Craig, and then later on in the show we'll talk a little bit about ITC, some of the things that I'm working on, some of the things that that I've experienced and had some amazing results. So Josh and I wanted to kind of share some of that information with everybody and talk a little bit about that. But anyway, so we're starting to get some viewers on, and welcome everybody to the show.
Welcome.
I'm glad to see everybody coming back for our third week. It's our third week,
3
right?
weeks. Okay. Congratulations.
Third show already?
Yeah. It's gone fast.
Right. Yeah.
I'm still trying to get my radio show or something off the ground. I think it'll just be a YouTube channel where I just take about 5-10 minutes to just clear up a myth, a historical myth or urban legend associated with it.
Well, that's a very perfect segue into this segment. There is a lot of myths and legends that associate with the paranormal. I think a little bit more than the truth. That's just my perception and my experience. But everybody has their own theories and things like that. So, and stories about certain locations. But the way I get down to the nitty gritty is talking to staff members. Forget management. They'll fill your ears with whatever you want to hear. Give me a janitor, give me the maintenance guy, give me the landscaper, give me any of the cleaning staff, things like that. Some of the maids, housekeepers, things like that. They'll tell you exactly what's going on in locations. That's how I go about digging up things.
I'll tell you something, though. You have to be careful with that too, because I have, for instance, at the Hotel del Coronado, when I was doing my Haunted by History project there, I would ask staff members what the ghost stories were, and they would so oftentimes, and Glen Tavern too, sometimes they would repeat what they found online. But and so my follow-up question, once they would say this thing that doesn't make a lot of sense, like for instance a ghostly maid that was murdered, which I already know isn't true, is up on the top floor in the poltergeist room of the Hotel del Coronado. I said, well, did you have any experiences up there? I mean, I'm familiar with the story. And they said, well, I said, would ask, where did you get the story? They would most often would say, I got it online. And then we both have a laugh over that. And, I go, okay. But yeah, it's good to know, I've never advocated for going in blind to a location, thinking that you don't want to be influenced by anything when you go in. To me, that I always kind of compare that to, going to a doctor because you have something wrong with your stomach, and then the doctor says, nope, I don't want to hear anything. Don't tell me any of your symptoms. Right. I will tell you what's going on. And then they start probing all the wrong parts of the body, Right. And all they really needed to do was focus on the stomach and the stomach area. So I'm not a big fan of that. You wouldn't choose a doctor that way. Why would you want to choose a paranormal group that way, especially if you're management? You want to know if there's any truth to some of the claims, but also helps to have a historical background, and more so than just Wikipedia. It has to go a little deeper than that.
Oh yeah.
Excellent point.
And it's funny trying to look up things online about a location. It's going to kind of already give you a biased opinion. What I found, what you have to do is dig down deep, start looking to see if you can find any records, things like that. That's what I've had to do, with some of the locations that I worked with.
Well, I think one of the best paranormal tools that you can possibly have. It's a little pricey, but it's certainly not as pricey as some of the gadgets out there. And I guarantee you, it will produce better results than what a lot of the uh, in the field practices are. And that's a subscription to newspapers.com. And I have nothing to gain by saying this. I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
but it is great. Now, if you live in Riverside in San Diego County, then it's Genealogy Bank. Um, they seem to have a huge record of newspapers there, and you'll be surprised what you come across. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I literally there's a haunted location that's featured in my book called the Julian Gold Rush Hotel. All of the pamphlets, and I think even on Wikipedia it says that it was built in 1897. Well, going back and looking over the records, it used to be 1887, and then it moved to 1897. But then I found this one little forgotten blurb, and I turned it over to the historian, the town historian of Julian, and we sat on it for a while we fact checked, and we were able to find other corroboration. But that hotel wasn't built until 1905 or 1903. There was a 5 year difference between when they claimed the hotel was built and when the hotel was actually built. And that's the thing that you'll discover in historic research of haunted places, is that there are big gaps in history where people are literally guessing.
Mm-hmm.
The plaque in front of the Palomar Inn in Old Town Temecula, everything's off by 2 years, but that's the historic plaque. And after meeting with the Historic Society there, I discovered that, they were just guessing. A lot of the stuff is just guessing. So I've always said that I think that the key to my success and why I get into places that other paranormal people don't usually are allowed to get into, including the Mission Inn and the Julian and all that, is that, you go in and you respect the history, but you always try to find some way to give back to the owners. That's the key. Help the owners understand. And I'm not talking about, divination and cleansing and psychic walkthroughs. We're talking about things that you can literally show them, historical records that may have been overlooked. And I guarantee you'll get asked to speak at historical societies. You might even be able to, lead tours there and actually help promote the good and not just go in and exploit the bad, sort of.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. And that's always been my premise on talking to the owners, talking to people that you can basically help out the location. I don't even mention the paranormal when I'm trying to get into a location.
Mm-hmm.
That comes later. Once they start feeling comfortable with you, you'll start opening up. And even though you mentioned that, they don't even care at that point. They're like, you know what? You've already given me a lot of information. Now how can I help you? Type of deal.
Right.
And it's funny. I mean, I worked with La Purísima Mission, where ghost hunters, where ghost adventures, both of those teams were basically banned from that location because of the things that they did, some of the things that they broadcast when they were told not to. And they reached out to me, and I helped do some research and things like that. And I got to know some of the head docents there, and we all became friends. And they were like, "Hey, we need you to come out. We're having the Mountain Men weekend. We would like you to come out and speak as a ghost hunter and talk a little bit about the history of the location, and then a little bit about the ghost side." So I did that one weekend, and then they invited me back to help lead tours. And with me helping lead tours, we raised, over a few years, we raised $12,000 for the mission.
Mhm.
I didn't get a penny of it. I didn't want any money. They would pay for my stay, and even then, I was like, "No, I'm coming out here on my time. I'm having fun. I'm enjoying it. I just want all the money to go to the mission."
Right.
But end result, they were like, "Nope, it's already paid for. Just come out."
Right.
And
Yeah.
but same thing with the Lincoln Heights jail. Yes, I heard it was haunted. I started talking to the facilitator, the main facilitator. Her and I
Mhm.
became really good friends. I started doing history, started getting a lot of information that they didn't even know about, stories that were not documented, things like that. And then I had an in. I would just, like I was telling Craig before the show, I would just call him up. Hey, I'm going to be in the area. Do you mind if I stop by? Nope. And I would
Mhm.
spend, the whole weekend there. So yeah, you just have to play it smart. There's a lot of ways to get around that, but anyway.
I'm loving some of the comments on the site. Am I allowed to respond to?
Oh
any of
yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah. No, if
Definitely,
you see
please.
any questions, I mean,
Okay, I'd like to respond to Mama Talisa about, well, if you're digging, especially on Google, you're going to get tons of conflicting information. You're absolutely right. I don't actually advise, uh, doing Google. What you want to do is get in deeper, get into the private like newspaper archives. And you're absolutely right. I always joke that the two worst sources for getting history and is our paranormal websites and also newspaper reporters, especially ones that like will write something modern in today's, like in 2021, but then they try to research and try to give the history of the place going back to the 20s. They almost always get it wrong, and that's why we had such a horrible time right now with the Cecil Hotel. I mean, for ever since 2017, there was the shot doc that was made. I think it was on Travel
mhm.
called The Curse at the Cecil or something like that. But they said that it was built in 1927, I believe, and they also were the ones that said that the Black Dahlia was last seen there, and this stuff was just absolutely not true.
Yeah.
And so finally, as a historian, I just got like real fed up with the misinformation. It's just the historian in me. I mean, I don't know that it really affects the paranormal that much, but the historian, it rankled me. So I actually went into Wikipedia and changed the date to the correct one and sourced it correctly. But folks, the Cecil was built, on December. It opened on December 20th, 1924, I believe,
Mhm.
and not 1927. And the Black Dahlia had nothing, no connection whatsoever to the Cecil Hotel.
No, she was actually seen at the
Biltmore, Millennial Biltmore. She was dropped off by a boyfriend, and all the story about her hanging out the bars. You can, again, through newspapers. I'm not getting paid by them, I promise, but I was able to find where that urban legend started, and it actually started in the 90s. It was just some comment in 1995 that some person made, and it was forgotten. It went nowhere. And then there was a pseudo historian that writes for various sites on in LA, websites like KCET and whatever. And she found this, and she just exaggerated it, brought it back up, didn't fact check it, and she put it in print. And then she's the one that's featured in this shot doc that came out in 2017. So she reinforced it, and from that point on, history just took a crazy turn, and people have been exploiting the Cecil ever since. Now the Cecil has a lot of problems, mind you. It doesn't need the Black Dahlia added to it. It's got enough deaths, and I even came across a suicide. I don't even know how to add this to Wikipedia or even add it to the toll list, but it was a person staying at the Cecil who went somewhere else and killed himself. It was like on the steps of like some building, but he was a guest at the Cecil. And so it's not technically a death inside the place, but it is a death directly connected to it that, you can just pile on, pile on. But here's the thing with the Cecil, and we talked about this, and you know darn well, Rob, all those Skid Row hotels, and there are lots of them. There's the Barclay, the Alexandria was on the edge of Skid Row for a while. I would say it's kind of pulling out of it, but that's a 1906 hotel, and all of these hotels have really strange deaths attached to them. The Cecil may be a little bit higher than normal, but not by much. And as far as the death count goes, well, the Alexandria, for instance, few people know this, but that was also one of the main inspirations for American Horror Story hotels. The whole thing about the Valentino vampire and the sealed off wing of that place. I mean, that was strictly Alexandria. In fact, they still have that sealed off wing. Still exists today under different ownership. And they do. I've actually seen it. I want to lead tours of it at some point. I mean, you can't go all the way up because the reason why it was sealed off had to deal with a dispute back in 1937 between owners. And once one of the owner that owned the main building, Alexandria Hotel building, once he discovered that his rival section of the hotel had no stair or elevator access, he got his revenge by sealing up all of the floors. After giving people notice, like 24, 72 hours, get out. So a lot of the stuff was left behind, which is like a treasure trove, old dilapidated luggage, toiletry items, clothing, chairs, furniture, left behind. And so it gave this kind of spooky quality to it. But they actually do have some film shoots there on the second floor and on the ground floor now. But they can't really do much with the building.
Yeah.
Still to this day.
Yeah, and just with everything that's going on with the hotel now, with like what you said, it's becoming Linda Vista all over again. It's a repeat. And Linda Vista, for those of you that don't know, it was basically somebody that was running a group took over running the hotel for the city, and he was charging people $600 to go in. That's how much he was charging groups. And he was pocketing all the money. And then so he had security just basically call him as soon as they saw anybody in the area. And yeah, I had to run in with him one time during a tour. Him and his security pinned me up against the wall and said, "Stay here." They wouldn't let me move.
Really?
And they were asking what I'm doing there, this and that. And I said, "Look, I paid for a tour. I'm, whatever." Right. And he had one of his security guys follow me like a hawk the whole night. And then afterwards, they confronted me after the tour was over. They all surrounded me and said, "Look, we know who you are. We don't want you coming back around. If we do, we'll have to take care of you." And I was like, "Yeah, whatever." And then I just left. But that place just became a joke. And I was joking
away from it back then. I mean, you wouldn't catch me darkening the halls of that place when it became that. Now, I visited a couple of times when it was a film location shoot and I was working on film. So, and that's I would hear the stories, but.
Yeah, and that's what it was. It was basically he was there. The person that's in charge was part of he would facilitate, do whatever for the film crew. He would watch the place. And then after that stopped, that's when he just brought his team in, and then they basically lived there. They were there all the time. And then, it just became a joke. But yeah, and it's sad to say because I was joking about this today. I was like, "Oh my God, this person's going to take over the Cecil," as a joke, But that's kind of how you see that. Just the way that security's letting people in, probably like you said, being paid off. There's YouTube videos popping up daily with people getting into the Cecil. So
yeah, I know. And I think that's gotta be addressed at some point. I'll be talking about that tomorrow, like I said, with the California Preservation Foundation, about what steps people can do with their property owners or management of haunted places in keeping kind of control over the situation, because the Cecil spun out of control. Other locations had problems too, if you remember. It wasn't just Linda Vista, but there was the Queen Mary as well. A lot of break-ins, paying off security. It was real easy at one point to break into the first class swimming pool. Some people, I think, even had keys. I don't know how they got home, but they got keys to it, locked the door.
Wow.
But there were other ways, to Jimmy. You just take I think like a ruler, a metal ruler. You could have just popped the lock on that. Sure. And I don't think the Queen Mary has ever found all the access points to the below the deck stuff, because people were constantly finding new ways in. They would try to lock it up and barricade, and seal off, and then sure enough, someone else finds another way to break in. Or I don't know if it's necessarily, I wouldn't call it breaking in, but trespassing. They would go in and find a door that, or a hatch, or some way they can just squeeze in and do that. So it's been a problem, and the Queen Mary's lost tons of money that way as well, and now it's in bankruptcy. But not because of the break-ins and the paranormal people, mind you. There were a lot of bad things going on management-wise, but that certainly didn't help, because they had to step up and spend extra money to try to lock it down and try to keep it somewhat safe.
Right.
People possibly going down there and maybe getting hurt and suing, and I mean, there's all kinds of problems there that arise.
Right. Yeah, it's in pretty bad shape, and I know that right now the city still doesn't know what's going to happen with the Queen Mary. There's just a lot of things that are going on. I just saw an article not that long ago. So it's just sad.
I was there for the dark zone thing, in October, and I was very limited on what I could access on Halloween night. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere without a PA accompanying you, and we were kept in like this big ballroom, and until we were called on to do our little bit, on a haunted part of the ship. So I got to see the Swan, because that's what allowed me to do my experiment there as part of the show, but what I could see walking through the lobby, there were chipped tiles. It looked very different than last time I remember seeing it a few years back. It's not in good shape.
No, the last time I was there was about 2 years ago. Yeah, and it was getting pretty bad. I know for a while there it was really bad. They started cleaning it up a lot, but then the last couple of years you kind of saw where it was going, and they had a lot of areas closed off because of renovations. I don't think it's because of renovations. I think just because it's the safety concerns more than anything.
Right. Yeah, it's got some major. Well, it was it's been sitting in Long Beach longer than it was an active ship on the ocean. Now it's been over 50 years sitting in Long Beach, and they made errors from the get-go with it. They overgutted it, and when they overgutted it, they actually destabilized the structure of the once former ship, and they had it declared a building. So I try to refer to it more as a building than a ship, because it ceased being that. For legal reasons and for union reasons, construction reasons, all that. They wanted to pay the lower fee to workers, so they had it declared a building. And so they would bring in these people, and they overgutted it for a Jacques Cousteau museum that failed. And so with all of the space, and what the problem was for the Queen Mary is, once they opened it, in 1971, 72, finally, after a few years of dragging their heels and just making all kinds of mistakes, they realized that people were only going up there once. and then they wouldn't go back again. And it wasn't until they started promoting the paranormal that people actually started coming back again. That was the one big marketing thing that actually worked on behalf of the Queen Mary. But they took it too far in recent years when they started doing the Dark Harbor and people dressing up as ghouls and zombies and mazes and stuff. All that stuff was okay until they messed with a seaman named John Petter, who was crushed in Hatch 13 in 1966, right? And I actually believe that he's one of the ghosts there, and I think a lot of people do. But what happened was when they started making him into a ghoulish costume character for the mazes and all the other stuff, the family members, the mother and the sister, I believe, of John Petter finally wrote and complained, and they threatened litigation against the Queen Mary if they didn't do something about it. So then they got rid of John Petter and they created Half Hatch Harry. And then they started promoting Half Hatch Harry, and that wasn't good enough. The letters and the threat of litigation came again. So now the Queen Mary doesn't even talk about John Petter. We weren't allowed to talk about him for the Dark Zone event. We weren't allowed to talk about anything of that nature. And the Cecil is going to run into this trouble too with Louisa Lamb if they don't watch out, because her family is still grieving. And you're seeing a lot of YouTubers coming on, and they're calling her up and thinking they're seeing her. They're acting ghoulishly about her, and this could lead to litigation against the actual owner of the hotel if they don't stop this, or at least make a deal. Because I mean, think about it. Put yourself in Louisa Lamb's family's shoes.
Right.
You would hate to see that, a loved one just being exploited like that.
It's awful.
No, exactly. And here's the thing: for those of you that have never been to the Cecil or stayed in the Cecil, but even before the Elisa Lam incident, they really frowned upon anybody in the paranormal going there. If you were caught filming, if they caught you with the cameras going in there, they would immediately escort you out and kick you out, whether you're a guest or not. They actually, the last time we stayed there was about 5 years ago. They would basically, you would have to walk through the front lobby, because there used to be a way to get around that. You didn't even have to walk through the front lobby. But then that you had to walk through, and the security guard would ask you for your key to even go up on the elevators. So as soon as you went up to the elevators, what they started doing to kind of prevent people from investigating the hotel and deter people from walking around upstairs, they were pumping music into the hallways. And the first time I was there was no music. The second time we were there was like, man, I can't believe they're pumping music into the hallways, and it's all night long. They do not turn it off. So if you're trying to do EVPs or anything, good luck.
Right.
So basically that's what they were doing to try to deter people. But it's, and plus with the rates now that they're charging, well, this was even the last time I stayed, the rooms were over $200 a night, and the rooms are just nasty. You would not want to sleep there. Trust me. When they used to be only like $40 a night. So as soon as they changed it to the stay on main, they hiked up the prices to, it was I think $249 a night, something like that. It was something outrageous. And then after the city taxes and everything, you're paying it was just over $300.
Well, I know we talked about this, privately, but there have never been any conclusive paranormal claims at the Cecil.
Zero.
Nothing. I mean, there's no haunted floor. There's no haunted rooms.
Nope.
There's really no one that's willing to come forward and tell a ghost story. The whole thing hinged on that elevator footage, right?
Yep.
And then that's been debunked.
Yep.
And so, so you know, I find it hard to believe that there isn't something paranormal there. It's just that right now, what we're not seeing anything. I mean, what Ghost Adventures did was a joke. It was not real, and they didn't even go with real historians for the place. I mean, they just brought in just kind of the worst people. I call them the D list, you know, and I know many of them personally. So it's like I would never bring them on mine, you know, my investigations, you know, because I try to run an honest ship, you know,
Right.
but I just felt like it was a squandered opportunity. Now, you know, hopefully a show or a group that is a little more responsible will get a chance to like really look it over. But I'm not seeing any of that right now. It could be happening. I'm not keeping track on every single walkthrough. But the ones that I have seen have been pretty ridiculous and farcical.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess a
No.
lot of people. I need to talk. Uh, you know, answer some of these questions here. uh, let's see. Reason why I dress in like a 20s thing is that is my that's my look. So another thing is that I don't know if a lot of people know what I do, but I actually fact check paranormal claims and also scrub the history records of historical places. And so I'm actually fact checking historians as well. And one of the things that I do is I do something that's called the theory of familiarization, which means I go into these locations and I'll rent the haunted spaces for about 4 or 5 days at a time. And I'll bring in a small cast of people. And what we do is we stage photos and run paranormal like EVP tests in these locations for about so sometimes it's like 15 hours a day, 17 hours a day, followed up by monitoring the room and running EVP sessions. So, for instance, what I did was like at the Hotel del Coronado, is I would rent the Kate Morgan room. I don't know how many of you know the Kate Morgan ghost story, but it's a very famous one out here in Southern California. And so I would hire someone and dress her up as Kate Morgan and put her in that room. And we would take a photo shoot for about 5, 6, 7, hours at a time. We'd move to another haunted room, like the poltergeist room. We shot there, and then we would just see what would happen. And there were instances where things, disrupted the shoot, but or we would catch EVPs or something. Um, but then we'd go back, listen to the data, and then how I always did it is I would do just a real brief historical search first, do the shoot. I would analyze the data that we collected, and then I would do the historical research afterwards and try to see if there was any kind of direct historical um, event that might actually be connected to the hauntings there. Because that's my whole basis is that, and probably why I dress the way I do, is that I actually believe that there is a historical connection to hauntings. So,
No, absolutely, and that's what I was talking about a few times. There's what we call a psychic scar. That I think that this is my theory. Like something tragic happens, it creates a psychic scar,
uh-huh.
and then what you're experiencing is that tragedy of what happened. And then me living in a location that's haunted. So I get to test my theories at any given time. So I know a lot of the stories that have happened with the deaths of the people that are here, and everything that I have talked about has been validated
Mm-hmm.
by people that when I first moved in here and was talking to the owner, I went up to her and I was like, how am I going to even approach her with this? Because, you come out somewhere and you're afraid to kind of, what the reaction is going to be when you're experiencing things. Now, how can you come out and say it? So just, I think it was my face that came across that. I was like, hey, can I talk to you about some things about the house? And she was like, sure. And then I think just because she knows me and then how my expression was before I started talking, she's like, what have you experienced? Those were words that came out of my mouth. I never brought up anything about haunted, nothing. And then I kind of explained something. I was telling her what I've seen. And then she said, Rob, do me a favor, go look at that picture. I walked over and I was just like, that's him. That's him. That's who I see. And she said, you're not the first one that has said it. She said, I really didn't want to believe it until I experienced something with him. And no, and then I said, but then there's a lady. And then she described her. And I said, yep. And she said, yeah, she's there too. So it was just kind of funny how, and I was only here for 2 weeks. And then it was like, on the 4th or 5th week is when I said, you know what, I got to say something. And then, then she started telling me the whole history, how next door was a church of science. This was the Sunday school that I'm living on. And then she started telling me about a little girl and things like that. And I was like, oh my God, everything is just like falling into place. And it was a silent movie star that lived next door also. And we believe that it was her daughter that died. But anyway, yeah, it was crazy.
Sometimes I'll come across some like really things that match up perfectly that just no one had been able to, no one had connected the dots correctly. It's very important to connect the dots correctly, and that's why I document everything with footnotes so that anyone that doubts where I'm coming from or wants to see what I'm seeing can go and look it up themselves. Very important. But like, for instance, there's a place on Catalina Island. It's a great place. It used to be called the Isthmus, and that's where all the silent movies were being shot in the 20s and into the 30s. Right. It's now called Two Harbors, and it's actually the oldest part and the first part that was settled, and that's where the pirates would show up and whatnot. But and that's where the Civil War barracks are. But there's this 1911 home called the Banning House Lodge, which is the only lodging, I believe, that's inland. And it's on this hill, this summit, overlooking two harbors, and it's the narrowest point of Catalina Island. Here's my microphone. But there's a story about a woman in white that has been seen on the outskirts of town. And several paranormal authors and paranormal books have, written about it. And some of it actually tried to connect the ghost to the house. And the stories tend to be wrong, as far as the theories as to why she's haunting the house. But I stumbled on to this forgotten story about a woman who had come over with her husband in the very early 1900s, and they were staying in the tent city there at the base of the hill. And this was before the Banning House Lodge was actually built. And what ended up happening, it's a strange story, but they went hiking one day and they didn't come back. And so the camp manager was, concerned about them. And then they finally did find the husband stumbling around. He was manic. He was acting crazed and lost and everything. And so they asked him, and he said his wife had died, and that he had lost his way, and and that he was very upset about it. So they gathered a search party in that area, and they got the husband to lead the search party around the area, and he wasn't even getting close to where this dead body of his wife was supposed to be. And ultimately, the party split up into more than one section, and one of the sections, they found the body. Now the husband had said that this woman had fallen from hiking. She was climbing up a rock. She lost her footing and fell. But when they found the corpse, she was sitting in an upright position. She hadn't fallen at all. She was just dead, sitting on a rock, leaned up against another rock. And so they looked up they looked up her sleeves and they found track marks all up and down her arms. And then they found a bottle close by.
Wow.
And she was actually a drug addict. And she was, I think it was opium or something like that. And she had OD'd. And the husband had tried to kill himself by taking the remainder. And it wasn't enough to kill him, but it made him manic. Right. And made him crazed. And that's why he was just out of his mind when they found him. So she's buried on that part of the island. And I don't know if it's an unmarked grave or not, but it fits the description of a woman in white. And where she's mostly seen in Two Harbors just happens to be on the other side of town, which is where the grave, in the direction of where the grave would have been. This blew me away because no one had come across the story. But I think that this is if I were a detective and this would be a crime scene or a case to look at, this is where my suspect would be as to who this ghost is. But I would go around and, I would ask the people that lived there and worked there, and a lot of them, including the manager at the time at the Banning House Lodge, had seen her. So it is a well-known local ghost story there. But I think I know who that person was.
Wow, that's amazing. And that's the thing. I mean, when you're doing a lot of research and you are an investigator, that's part of it. I mean, it's not just trying to gather evidence. I think evidence is the secondary part of it. But doing all the research and then trying to find the answers, that's when you put all the pieces together, that's the satisfying part. Just trying to go somewhere to gather paranormal evidence.
Thank you, Raina. Yeah, drug-induced psychosis, not manic. Well, he was acting manic, but it was, or maybe I used the wrong term, but you're right, drug-induced psychosis.
But I mean, you just hit the nail on the head there, Craig. So Craig
has a great question. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
It looks like Carl's a good question. What is your experience of the percentage of debunked versus real cases?
What? Did you repeat that?
Oh, Rob, can you see the question? There it is.
Oh, my experience of the percentage of debunked versus real cases. Well, I will tell you that a lot of the stories attributed to locations. Now, I can't speak broadly for everything. I can only speak broadly for, I can only speak about places that I actually research, which is like 16 to 20. It takes time to do this.
Sure,
and
definitely.
I will say that a good many of them, the ghost legends, are not factual in some of these cases. But there are that will be strikingly strange or strikingly close. For instance, I can tell you, like the Glen Tavern Inn in Santa Paula, there was no prostitute that was beheaded. There was no gambler that was killed upstairs, and there was no speakeasy and bordello on the third floor. And this was all invented in the 1980s, and I can tell you exactly who invented it as well and what year that it was introduced. But it was there to describe what was paranormal on that floor, but they just took a wrong guess. That floor is active. I had weird things happen to me. And I'm just saying that sometimes cutting away the urban legends and just kind of starting over and going in and trying with a fresh start, we might get a better chance of finding out what is there. Now, here's an interesting example of something that came close. And one of the locations I'm a historian for is the Aztec Hotel in Monrovia, California. Almost everything you'll find online is factually incorrect on the place because no one's really gone in depth and looked at it. There is a story about, I believe it's room 120. It's 120, I believe. It's a room that was the most haunted room, and it's supposed to be a prostitute that was was killed there by possibly a John. There's a couple of variations of the story, but as the story goes, and it's a false one, is that while it was a speakeasy, they took a prostitute met a John, went up to room 120. They got into a fight over the price, and the prostitute got beat up by the John and left to die. And she hit her head on a radiator, a heating radiator, and to this day that room's haunted, and the ghost name is Razzle Dazzle. Okay, so that's the story, and it came from a psychic who told the story to a Los Angeles Times reporter in, say, 1990, and nobody bothered to, research and look into the archives to see whether or not there was such a death in that room, because it would have been reported in a small town like Monrovia at that time. It would have been reported. No deaths at that time, but what I found interesting was that in the late 20s, there was an Elks Lodge just literally a block away that was being built. And there was a connection between this Elks Lodge and the Aztec Hotel. And while the Elks Lodge was being built, the Elks used to meet at the Aztec and for card parties. And the name of their card parties were Razzle Dazzle parties. So I thought that was a real interesting connection that the psychic made, because there was no way she would have known about the Razzle Dazzle connection. I found that out through historical research. So she may not have been, 100% accurate, but there actually may be she might have picked up on a Razzle Dazzle card party connections with the hauntings. And I will tell you, I have been in that basement where that speakeasy is supposed to have been. And I did pick up an EVP there that was 2 sets of deuces was what it said. It was a deep male voice, very clearly into the audio. And I didn't play poker, so I kept going, what does this mean? What does this mean? And finally, I looked it up and found that it was like a opening hand for poker, 2 sets of deuces or something like that. So so it does seem to be a connection between gambling and maybe what's haunting there or what's staying behind. So it's interesting, but as far as things that come close, some things that nail it, but a lot of things are, not true at all. And I think it's important to do all of that, because otherwise, I think if you just believe everything you hear, you may actually be snipe hunting and not ghost hunting. You may be actually looking for a ghostly personality that simply does not exist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because here's so I'm going to share. So Craig wrote this book. How long ago did you write this book, Craig?
Well, it took me 7 years to research and write, but it came out in 2017. Yeah.
Isn't that so? When I met you was at Brandon Alvis's premiere for his documentary that he shot. And that's where I met you.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. And no, it's funny because you and I started talking about Glen Tavern, and ironically, Brandon lived on the property for many years.
Yes, he did. And he's got some great stories. We did something together. This was before he got on Ghost Hunters.
Ghost Hunters. Yeah.
It was the weirdest thing, but I was doing a book presentation in the lobby, and he had a show called Ephemera. And so I asked him if he, wanted to share my space, and we could talk about his video show, and I would just talk about the book and whatnot. So we had a full lobby, in the Glen Tavern Inn, and we kept having technological glitches with everything. I mean, nothing worked, and we kept changing out. We had Apples, we had Macs, Windows, we had PCs, we had every tablets. We were borrowing computers, and nothing was like working. And then finally, something sort of worked. So I just went ahead and did my presentation. and I was just winging it because I don't think I had my computer working at all, and I just decided, screw it, I'm just going to go forward. From the moment I started, the alarms in that building were getting tripped throughout the whole entire building. And we're talking about the door alarms, the fire alarms, everything. It was going first floor, second floor, third floor, first floor, third floor, second floor. And I could hear these buzzes going off, and then they'd quit, and then seconds later go off again, quit. And so once I did my spiel, Brandon was still struggling to get his computers going, and so I'm like kind of just doing question and answer. After Brandon got his going, I walked over to the front desk, and the general manager was just sweating, and he was just standing at the board. He said, I'm sorry for all the distractions, but the alarms are going off. I've never had this happen before. And I said, I can't leave. And he's literally punching and resetting these before the big alarm comes off,
Right.
So everything's being tripped. And he said, I don't know what the deal is. I've called in the security company. They're not coming out till tomorrow. Long story short story long, as soon as Brandon wrapped it up and we finished, all of the alarms stopped. It was amazing. I mean, like the moment we stopped, the alarms stopped being triggered. And so we all, even the general manager, we all went, to dinner and we talked about it. And it was a strange thing. And I had heard later, because I'm close with the people that work at the Dueling Tavern, Chad Lindbergh and Nick Roth did something there.
Yep.
And it was a live feed, and the major alarm went off on them.
Yep.
So whatever's haunting there, it doesn't want. If it doesn't want you there, it starts screwing with the alarms. That's the moral of the story.
The things that are there do not like film. Period. I've talked to, and it was funny because I talked to Chad about that incident one night at a party we were both at, and I was kind of making fun of him, and it was funny.
He's a funny guy. Yeah.
He is funny. I've got to investigate with him a few times, and talk to him personally a few times at a couple of different parties. So we kind of know all the same people. So he's good friends with another good friend of mine too. So it's just funny. You just kind of compare all the notes and you kind of talk about, different things that have happened there. And then, just sitting at the Glen Tavern and because I knew Brandon, God, I've known Brandon for many years. I mean, just going to the Glen Tavern, and then I'll just sit there and chit chat with him while he was working the front desk. I mean, when he was living there, it was, I would always run into him and just start talking to him. And then he was kind of shy, I mean, for a long time. And then he started branching out when he started his group. And then he started becoming almost a regular guest on Ghost Adventures and things like that, just talking to them about different things. But it was just kind of funny. But no, just doing all the fact checking, things like that. I mean, that's what, you and I have talked about. It's just funny how you hear so many places make up stories like we were just talking about and things like that to try to get people to come. And then once you start doing all the fact checking, all of the research and everything, and then everything that you're hearing, all the urban legends. So just hearing all the urban legends and all the things like that are just happening, it's just kind of funny because there's a lot of people kind of doing, is it fact or it's not fact or faked. It's people are doing, is it fact or legend? And it's kind of funny how a lot more people are starting to do that now. Because
I like that because I think we collected so many ghost stories through the paramedia, which term I like to throw out. We collected so many stories from various media outlets, whether it be television, radio, books, newspapers, magazines, word of mouth. We just collected them, and I think now it's kind of a time. It would be a good time to just kind of sit down and look at them again from a fresh perspective and go, okay, does this, match up? Is this seem to be a one-off story, or other people experiencing this? Is there a historical connection to it? Again, what I usually do is I'm not one to just say just because the history's wrong or the ghost legend's wrong that it's not haunted. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, I find that most of these places actually are. It's just that what we are told to believe about how the hauntings began may not be true.
Mm-hmm.
And so, someone commented about keeping an open mind. Yes, you absolutely do have to keep an open mind. But, certain things like, no bordello up on the third floor. I mean, that's just what it is. There was no bordello. Now, were there prostitutes working out of the room at one point? Were there card games going? Was there drinking? Were there all the elements of a bordello took place in there? If so, it's highly probable, but it wasn't organized.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is use common sense as well. If you've ever stayed at the Glen Tavern Inn, there's no way that you're going to have a secret club up on the third floor and not hear it on that second floor, because you hear every single footstep, clomp, clomp, clomp.
Yep.
And so it makes no sense. Plus, historically, just looking over the records, they didn't even add fire escapes until the 20s. That was attic space, and I think it was completed around 1920, where they actually filled in rooms. So there was no real way access. The stairs didn't even go up to the third floor until later. And you don't have a speakeasy historically upstairs so much as you have it down below. And you always have to have an escape route. And I always say, if you don't have any fire escapes, there's no escape route, there's no speakeasy. You've got to have an escape route, and plus the fact that it was built literally across the street from a church. And even though that third window was added later, the one in the middle of the hotel, that was added in I want to say the 40s. The two end ones were there when the hotel opened in 1911.
And it's that window there.
Yeah, that's the middle one. Yeah, that's the middle one. And that's actually a very active place. I don't know why, but that area is active. But that's part of the thrill, is once you kind of wipe away the myths and then start in and trying to figure out what it is, because there's definitely something there. The Pierpont Inn is another, place that has a few legends that don't quite gel, but the stories there that do. There were some family members of the Gleitman, the original owners, the long-standing owners, that died in certain buildings that are active, and there are stories that seem to collaborate that it's, family members from the past that are still hanging around that place.
And actually up in the main building, the original hotel, upstairs, that place is so active.
I know. It's I again, that place, when I first started my project, they were anti-paranormal. Even when I did my photo shoots there, they were anti-paranormal. But my book actually flipped them to being pro-paranormal, believe it or not, because they saw what I was doing and they liked what I was doing. And so I get these little, I'll have conversations with them, but workers, let me just preface by saying that main building, the 1910 building, there was some bad work done on it, and it got yellow taped, and it's still yellow taped to this day, until the structure gets reworked. And it was a person working without a permit, and they removed things and destabilized the building. So they have to fix it. Okay. While it's been closed, workers who have come in have been experiencing the paranormal there. So it's still very active. and I can't wait till it opens again. I mean, they keep saying it's going to open this year, and then they'll say it's next year. But COVID really screwed everything up because I think it was already supposed to open by now, but they just couldn't finish the work to get it done. But that second floor you're talking about, that's where the original hotel rooms were.
Yep. And so, no, go ahead.
Oh no, those stories go way back.
Mhm.
Now the family that owned it for years and sold it off, they got mad at me for even asking about the ghost stories because they were just absolute denial. They'll actually go after you. But I've met some longtime Venturans who said, "Oh, don't listen to them." I said, when I was a kid in the '50s, we knew it was haunted. So that made me feel better because you don't want to hurt people's feelings or whatnot. But when they were in denial,
Mhm.
I would be hearing stories. One lady checked into the Austin Pierpont suite, and she came back like within hours saying, "Is that place haunted?" And they said yes. And what happened was, while she was up in the room, I guess the bathroom door slammed shut, and she tried to open it, and something was blocking it on the other side. And then after about 2-3 minutes of struggling, then the door just opened,
Mhm.
and no one was there. And so she got mad. She wanted a refund, and she chewed them out about why they didn't say that place was haunted.
Right.
So you do run into trouble when you deny it. Now, my book hopefully turned it around. They told me it did. But also, when it's that active, it's very hard to be in denial.
Yeah.
I mean,
Now,
even though Del Coronado tried to deny for years that it was haunted, for many years, but it finally, they just couldn't do it anymore. They had to admit it.
so when the Pierpont was sold to the Wyndham chain, um, it was funny because the girl that was managing the location called me up, and because I was trying to get into the Pierpont for years, and as soon as they
Yeah.
heard any ghost, anything paranormal, they would just, like you said, get out of here. They would shoo
Yeah.
you away. They wouldn't even let you stay there. They were that paranoid about the paranormal. But then once, it was funny because as soon as a Wyndham took change, once they bought the hotel, I got a phone call from the manager of the hotel and asking, hey, and she kind of explained who she was. And then she said, would you be interested in coming and investigating the hotel? And I said, wait, is this a Pierpont? And she said, yeah. The Pierpont in Ventura? And she said, yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, I asked that because I was like in shock that they were calling.
Yeah.
And then she said, yeah, is there any way that you could come out? And I said, sure. I said, give me about half an hour. I could come out there. And she's like, yeah, I just want you to come do a walkthrough with me. And she said, I have a couple of stories. So we kind of went through a walkthrough, and then she said, when can you bring, other people and bring some equipment to do an investigation? And I said, wait, what? And I mean, it just, I was just like in shock because, just because of the reputation of the hotel, they did not want to have any. So it just all turned around once it changed ownerships.
Yeah.
They wouldn't allow any other teams to come in.
Yeah.
But she said, look, I just needed to kind of do this incognito. I just need answers. We're getting a lot of complaints. And in that suite was one of them. And she told me the story about what happened with the guest. So I was like, are you serious?
What
And she
story
said,
would
yeah.
that be, by the way?
The one where the door shut and she was locked in the bathroom.
Yeah. That happened while it was in receivership. Yeah. And it was the receivers when it was in between.
Mhm.
They were the ones that were just really weird. That was when I was there. I had
No, but she told me that happened to several guests.
Okay.
And then she said the office staff, because the original hotel upstairs, it's offices. There's no rooms up there. It's all offices.
Yeah.
And a lot of the office staff do not like going up there after dark. They said as soon as certain time comes, As soon as it's sundown, they will not even go upstairs.
Yeah, I got to tour that area back in 2009.
Yeah.
I was,
When I went, the first time I went was, it was probably about 2010, 11, somewhere around there. No, it was later than that because it changed ownership. What, back in 15? Somewhere around there.
Yeah, it was. I'd have to look it up, but it was. I want to say it was around. Yeah, it probably was around 2014, 2015.
Yeah, because that's when I went. I mean, I did go by there earlier. Like I said, I was kind of wandering around and wanted to stay there, and ownership basically asked me to leave. They didn't want me around. But anyway, because I was walking around taking pictures and things like that, and then they were like, "Yeah, no, you're not. You can't take pictures here. You need to go."
Yeah.
Can I tell you the story about how I got introduced to the Beer Pond Inn?
Sure.
I was doing a vintage shoot, and weird things were happening, of course, and which is, it always happens when I do vintage shoots at the Beer Pond Inn. There's something about it that it just triggers the activity. And I was talking to the manager, the catering manager, and he said, you really ought to stay in, I think it's room 306. And I said, why? He said, well, a couple of months ago, there was a dad and son paranormal group that were exploring the place. And that's the room they were staying in. And I was just talking to them, one day, and they said they were really having a ball and they were bonding and all this stuff. And he goes, well, are you going to share, your findings with me when you get back home? Oh, sure. Well, the next day, the day they were supposed to check out, they were a no-show at the front desk. And so they got a little concerned, that these people hadn't left yet. So they searched the key card and the activity of the building, and they found that they had left about 2:30 in the morning. So they sent housekeeping up into the room, and they found the room kind of like in disarray, and one of the beds, someone had peed in the bed.
Oh my God.
So, of course, this got tongues wagging, what could have been there to make one of them pee in their bed, and then they just fled. So they called them, and said, is everything okay? We know, at checkout, and no reply whatsoever. So they called them again and said, well, is it okay if we just charge, your bill on the credit card you left with us? And if there's a problem with that, please let us know. We really want to know how your experience was at the Pure Pond Inn. No reply. So they just ran the card. It went through, and they never heard from that father-son again. But that was what they basically were challenging me to stay in that room.
Right.
And they said, you should stay in that room if you really want to find out what's going on. So I was like, I was staying in one of the cottages, and I went, okay, I'll stay there. And let me tell you, I didn't like it one bit in that room. I mean, you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. We did catch one EVP, my hair and makeup person and I, and I slept with my clothes on. And, I had that
just
cottage,
in case.
and then this place was just like, it was just really thick. And not that the cottage was any better. It was a lot better compared, but it had a weird vibe too. But the place that it surprised me, that is really active, I've caught EVPs there a couple of times now, is that little cottage. Not so much the big one, it's that little cottage. That's the one you want to keep your eye on.
Right.
And it was built in the 1920s. And so I always tell people, I mean, the Pure Pond Inn hasn't been discovered yet. It's still virtually unknown, but there are parts of that property that is as active as the Glen Tavern Inn, where it's consistent. But it's the older sections, It's I have heard that some of the more mid-century modern buildings are having a little more activity. They're still trying to renovate it and try to get it open. But now's the time to actually investigate because there's not a lot of business there.
Right.
But it is open. You know, the restaurant's closed, unfortunately. A lot of things are closed. At least it was last time I was there a month or so ago. But that is one of those places that few people know about, few people investigate, and but it's active consistently. So.
No, absolutely.
Wow.
It is crazy, and it's funny because I was at the Julian a few years ago.
Mhm.
I checked in, and the girl asked me. She said, "Are you a paranormal investigator?" And I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Do you know Craig Owens?" And I said, "I've heard of him." And then she said, "Wow, he just stayed here, like he checked out a few days ago because I think you stayed during the week, if I
Mhm.
remember
Mhm.
correctly."
Mhm.
And I checked in on Friday night, and she said, "Yeah, he just checked out a couple of days ago." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Because yeah." And then the other thing was when she was running my information, she said, "Yeah, you guys both live in Southern California, up north." But she said, "No, that's funny that you guys both came in here on the same week."
Mhm.
And she
Yeah.
said, "Yeah, he's writing a book." That was when you were just writing this book, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
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 So,
They usually don't allow paranormal investigations, and what's funny is when I met with the owner and the owner agreed to it, he goes, "We don't talk about the ghosts here," and he goes, "We'll let you write the book. We'll let you do the photo shoot. We'll even let you investigate. But you're not going to get any ghost stories out of us. So don't even try."
Right.
Well, that's where, having membership to databases come in handy, newspaper databases, because in the 70s, they admitted it on record that that place is haunted. Now, why they are less, you know, wanting to talk about it now is I don't know. That's their decision, but they are on record, so I didn't need to ask any of them. Some of them volunteered stories anyway, just
yeah.
because I developed an interpersonal relationship with them. But what's interesting is that once I wrote the chapter and before it got published, I showed it to them. And because I wanted to make sure that what I was writing about them was correct, and they said it was. So, um, so it worked out. It worked out just fine. But yeah, it's a funny little place. I personally have never had anything paranormal happen to me there, but some people have. So, um, for what it's worth, there were a couple of weird things on audio that we caught, but it was not something that I could clearly say was paranormal. So it's kind of
Right.
pushed aside. But there were some weird sounds.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's been, it's a really cool hotel. The first night I stayed there, I did have some experiences, and I've stayed there a few times. But I haven't had, it was only that one time that I had any type of experiences there. And it was funny because we're talking about it at breakfast, and a couple came over, and they said, "Can we talk to you?" And I was like, "Sure." Um, so we went outside after breakfast, and then we were just sitting there talking, and we're comparing stories. And because they were staying upstairs,
Mhm.
it was what, room 10, right? Was I believe.
Yeah, that's one of the rooms. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so we were in room 10, and then there were another couple like caddy corner across the
Mhm.
hall, and they were hearing the same things that we were, and they knew that I was up because they saw the light on. So, and they heard me talking. But yeah, I was kind of like doing investigating like all outside. I was upstairs, doing a bunch of things, and I don't like to kind of disturb the guests, so I'm super quiet when I'm investigating.
Yeah, it's a pretty
Um,
big building, so it makes weird noises, and it's hard to be stealth. You
yeah,
know.
exactly. So I sat outside the room. There's like the bathroom outside if you go down the hall. So I was sitting out there, and I was kind of listening to things. And then we both saw what looked like a figure come down, and then she went down the stairs. It looked like a woman. Um, and that's kind of what they saw too. So it was kind of funny how we compared notes.
See,
And
that's
go ahead.
interesting, because this does what you just described.
Mhm.
What ethnicity is she? Was she? The reason why I ask is because the Julian Gold Rush Hotel is plays an important part in African American history
Yeah.
in Southern California
Yep.
because it was built and operated by a well-respected black married
Yep.
couple,
Yep.
and they held on to the hotel. The man died there.
Hmm.
Albert Robinson died in 1915, and then his
Hmm.
wife sold it in 1921.
Yeah.
However, and the story is that Albert haunts it, and maybe
Mm.
his wife Margaret. But there have been an apparition of a white woman there as well. And what I found interesting, I'd have to look it up exactly in the book, but there was a person that stayed in that place who, oh, that was the best way to say, he came up with a name. And what they have is they have these little drawer journals in the room, so you can
Hmm.
like leave your notes and your perceptions in the journals. And so someone left a journal, what name that they came across while they were staying at the Julian Gold Rush Hotel, and attributed it to what he thought might be a ghost or not. And I think it was like Lulu or something like that. It was something of that variation. And when I came across that in doing the historical research of the place, I actually came across someone that was almost named that exactly, that had a very strong connection to that building. Uh, there were actually two that
Hmm.
it could possibly be. One was the very first Apple Queen. And she also won it in later life in the 50s. She became the Apple Queen again. But then the second owners that took over from the Robinsons, I believe, had like a mother that also had that same name. So I thought, now again, that's interesting that someone would come up with that name, but
Yeah.
people have seen a female apparition roaming around.
Yeah, and she wasn't black. That's the whole thing that kind of threw me
Yeah,
because everything that you hear is tied to the Robinson family.
yeah, that's
So
what marketing is. Yeah,
so when we saw that and when we heard her talking, because that's what we heard. We heard a female talking and like she was weeping. Um, so I was like, "Who's crying?" So I went outside and I took a recorder. And um, so we were both sitting outside, and we heard a door open. And I think that's when and then that's when we saw the apparition go down the stairs of the female.
yeah.
And so when I was talking to that couple, they saw the backside of her. We saw the other side of her going down, and that's why they said, we talk to you, and so they wanted to see if we saw what they saw, and yeah, it was funny. There's four of us that saw that same
Well,
woman walking
well,
down.
let me tell you, I gave kind of a side stare because what I wanted to say is that the areas that you're claiming that you saw this, where you saw this, that is actually the hot spot of the place. Those stairs are people have seen apparitions on that stairs or a shadow,
Hmm.
crossing the stairs. There's a stained glass window right by the stairs,
Hmm.
and the Ballinger family that owns the hotel, and they've owned it for years. They actually were in the dining room when the building was completely closed. They were playing cards with some friends, and then suddenly they saw a shadow, all of them, go down the stairs through that stained glass, and all the alarms were off, the burglar alarms and everything. Nothing got tripped. So they did a search of the building, didn't find anything. Now, when I was there, I planted, there's like a little vase of fake flowers. And after I did my photo shoot up and down the stairs and in that lobby, I put a recorder hidden in that vase. And
you're talking about when you first come in the main door on
right.
that table, there's that big vase. Okay.
Yeah. And there was some energy crackling sounds that picked up that a couple of occasions throughout the night that was weird. And because it shouldn't have been moving, nothing should have been moving. There were no sounds of steps or anyone coming and approaching, yet there was this crackling sound that would come home. It was just a weird sound, like the cellophane wrapper of a cigarette case. If someone were to remove it and you just do that in your hands, that was the kind of sound that it was making. But on my last night there, what ended up happening is I had a whole armload of like recorders, and I was going to the honeymoon suite, and I had this whole, and I was heading toward the front doors about 2 a.m., and I swear I heard a woman call out something to me right from that base of that stair area. And that's why I kind of smiled when you said that you heard a woman speak, because I thought, and of course I had an armful of recorders, none of them were on, right?
Right.
Of course.
So I felt like a fool, and I kept moving back and forth thinking, was it a squeaking floorboard? Because sometimes that can sound like a voice or something. And I can get the floorboards to squeak, but it didn't sound like this. And it sounded like a greeting, like a happy greeting, like, hi, how are you, kind of thing. And I just kind of filed it away as probable. I've grown over the years to kind of trust these experiences, that it's not my imagination, because I'm fairly skeptical minded. So when this thing happens, I need to pay more attention to it and be more accepting of it instead of dismissing, because so many of us do in the world. So
no, I mean, that's the best way to go into it. I always go into everything with a skeptic mind. You have to, because you don't want to go in with a biased opinion. Yes, you can do your research beforehand. If people have some validated stories, or they're like when I went into the Pierpont, something like that. I wanted to go into it blind because I wanted to see what I feel first. And then, so I know that you said you don't like to go into something blind. What I do, I'm just going to give how I do things. I'll go into a location. I will take notes. I don't like sitting around, just sitting there trying to wait for something to happen, trying to capture an EVP. I like to be on the move. That's just me. And I'm always constantly moving around, constantly walking, constantly, because I'm in the mindset to where if you're in somebody's home, right? So if I walk into somebody's house and I'm an intruder, what are you going to do? You're going to hide. You're going to look for a place to hide, right? But if you see somebody just walking around, kind of minding their own business, they're going to kind of get curious. What is this person doing? And they're going to start following you. This is my theory. And then all of a sudden I'll be like, hey, there's somebody behind us. And I'll just clear my thoughts, and let my body feel what I'm feeling. And then I'm like, there's somebody behind us. And then I'm like, I'll like turn around really quick and snap a picture. And I was doing that in Scotland. And oh my gosh, I was capturing shadow figures following us. And I was like, listen, we're walking, listen behind us. There's somebody following us. And they're like, listen. And I would just sit there or stand there. I was like, just stay still. And then I said, we're going to take 2 steps and listen. After we stop, listen. And they were like, dude, somebody's following us. And I said, I told you. So, and then I said, hold on 1 second. And then I just turned around and snapped it like 3 pictures. And then I was like, check this out. And then they're like, what the hell is that? And there was totally a full body shadow person standing behind us. And so that's what I do. And it seems like that works. And I'll do the same thing with EVPs. And that's how I captured, apparitions on film, things like that, doing the same type of technique. I'm not the type that is going to sit around and just sit there and do EVPs for half an hour and then move to another room, do EVPs for half an hour and do things like that, because doing that technique, I have never come out with anything. But if I I'll go into another location several times and just start gathering all the information that I can. And that's how I investigate.
Yeah. Well, the way I always with my approach, I mean, it's pricey. I mean, it's when you bring in models or actors and you recreate certain parts of history in the location, and then you monitor it. And I always stayed in the most haunted room, which probably wasn't a great idea because I was hardly there, because I was always running around the other parts. But I guarantee you, after 4 days of doing this, day and night, you have a pretty good idea whether there's merit to those stories or not.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
the way I would always do it is, it doesn't really matter. Some of the stories are personal experiences, but we really try to document it. And and of course I've had some people try to make things up, and they're pretty easy to catch when that happens, because the stories are wild and sound like Hollywood. It's not realistic. But there are some that are interesting. I think one that I never really took seriously at the time was at the Glen Tavern Inn on the third floor. The hair and makeup person said that she was turning around in one of the rooms and nearly collided with what she described as a Mary Poppins in a blue dress that quickly just disappeared. And when she told me that, I was like, oh, okay, well, investigate that room, come back, and let's do an EVP session, and I'm going to run and do these other things, and we'll compare notes later. Well, that was the only thing that happened. Fast forward years later, I'm at the Glen Tavern Inn, and a guy who doesn't know me and doesn't know, has never read the book or doesn't know, what I do, he's intrigued, so he introduces himself and he starts telling me, and he says that one of his housekeeping friends saw a woman in an old-fashioned blue dress up on the third floor. So I thought, okay, see, this is what you look for, is similarities in stories from people that are completely unrelated to one another. So now that's back on the table. There's a woman in a blue dress from the 19 teens era there, or possibly.
Yeah, no, it's just crazy. So we're going to wrap this segment up. And so, Craig, where can people find your book?
Oh, you can find it on, I have a website called bizarrela.com. And it's like, it caters to old Hollywood. I do some paranormal postings there, but it'll eventually do that. But there's a store there. I had books on Amazon. They sold out today. So if you want to be patient, you can wait a few days. But it's sold out on Amazon, and so.
And it's
books
a
are
great
on the way.
Yeah, it's a great book, and the some of the pictures that you did with them, that it was just amazing. I got to meet the model that you had in your book, and just the photography in there is amazing. And congratulations on that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, it's won some awards and recognition. I mean, it won the Publishers Weekly Star Review, which is almost impossible for a paranormal book, especially one that isn't gone, published through a major publisher to get. So, that was a big plus. And it led me to television appearances and various stuff. It's opened all kinds of doors. But I didn't let every person investigate, mind you. They had to be the right mindset to do it. And so, try to get control and keep control of the environment was critical during our times there. But I would train a few to do like real basic EVP stuff, but I wouldn't send them alone doing it. There had to have been someone with experience sitting in. Sometimes it was me. Other times it was someone else that I brought in from the paranormal side to just kind of manage what was going on. And so we caught quite a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah. Well, cool. Yeah, you and I will have to definitely get together here soon. So yeah, we'll set something up. And no, there's a bunch of places around the Cecil that we can go check out. And
yeah.
I can tell you about the underground tunnels around that area also.
Oh yeah, no, they were building those a lot,
Yeah.
even as far as the 1900s, and they were doing it without permits. That's why people weren't being able to keep track of them. The mayor of LA got really mad about that. There was something in the LA Times back in 1907.
And there's still a couple of cool speakeasies around there too.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I just want to say, Illegally Blonde, thanks. I hope you look great. I saw that you had done a wardrobe change. Can one of you tell why I have voices in a whisper in my recording? Does anyone want to explain that? I'm not sure what you mean. I have voices in a whisper in my recording. Well, EVPs stand for electronic voice phenomena, and if you have control of the environment and no one's around, and you can accommodate and account for every sound that you're recording during your phase, and you catch a whisper, then that would be an EVP. No conclusive proof that it's a ghost voice, but let's face it, there are plenty of examples where you'll pick up archaic language, old slang, and whatnot. So, so Patty says Rob always has extra voices in his broadcast.
So we were talking about that. We were talking about that. And I actually heard it. So anyway, like I said, my place is pretty active. So yeah, so people will hear other voices that sound like me, that are coming through the broadcast. I'm not even talking, and they'll hear people saying things in my voice. So yeah, people are always constantly messaging me that, hey, you're talking, but you're not talking. Somebody else is using your voice, and we're hearing it on our side. So yeah, it's crazy.
Well, I live in a 1914 house, and it's sadly not haunted.
Right.
That was funny when you said that.
Well, my wife and kids appreciate it. But
of course.
When am I? I try to go for these pre-World War II homes,
Yeah.
I lived in a haunted place once, and it was really weird, and I kind of want to experience that. But,
like I tell people, you have to set boundaries when you do live in a home that has activity.
Yeah.
You set the boundaries, and they respect those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And you do have to ignore them, because they're like a kid. They're trying to get your attention. If you ignore them, they don't bother you. But if you keep on giving them attention, that's what they're looking for, and they're going to constantly want that attention. So you have to, like I said, you set the boundaries, and once those boundaries are set, you have to stick with those rules.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to argue that point. At all. So yeah.
But yeah, if you want to stick around, and Josh and I we're going to start up another topic here about some ITC stuff.
Yeah, sorry, we went on a little long, Josh.
No, that's fine.
We're actually approaching almost 2 hours. We may we can finish up talking with Craig, and then we can hit that on our next show. considering the time left, I don't know if we can open up a can of worms in 15 minutes.
Well, I mean, if somebody wants to, I mean, that's fine.
We have a few questions in the chat also as
okay,
well.
let's go ahead and if anybody has any questions, go ahead and throw them out there.
Nora had a question about, Craig, any haunted theaters in your experience?
Oh, yes. I don't know why, but like movie palaces and movie theaters, hotels, and of course hospitals, they just all seem to be, they all seem to be just magnets for this. I did a walkthrough several years ago through the Los Angeles Theater in downtown Los Angeles, and that was I think it opened in 1931 for the premiere of Charlie Chaplin's City Lights.
All right.
And it was the last of the big movie palaces built in Los Angeles. And it opened during the Great Depression. Well, the story is that the projection booth is haunted. And I got contacted by a friend who got contacted by a television station. And so we were just doing a walkthrough, not just the friend and I. We were just doing a walkthrough. And I just had a recorder in my pocket. I wasn't doing EVP or anything. We were just taking notes, and I had a couple of meters to run through because I wanted to find out where the hot spots were the wiring and where the circuit boxes and whatnot. But when we were up in that projection booth, I caught like the strangest loud EVP in my recording. It was louder than our voices. I mean, whatever it was spoke right into it, and it made no sense whatsoever. And when I play it for friends, I mean, they just laugh because it's so goofy. But yeah, the movie theaters do tend to be haunted, and I've heard tons of stories about various places, especially in the LA area.
Right.
So yeah, I would tend to believe that theaters. Maybe it's because there's so much emotion that goes through them that it just collects people. People apparently really love the old movie palaces back when movies really were king, and that was the primary place where you saw them.
So down in LA, too bad it's the pandemic hit, but every January, they have what they call Night on Broadway. They open up all of the movie theaters on Broadway. Believe it or not, the LA Broadway in its heyday was bigger than Broadway in New York. So they have this thing called Night on Broadway, and they open up all of the theaters. They have different musical groups. They have
they do like
comedy acts.
Yeah,
they bring back like all these different shows at different times in each of the theaters. It's really cool, and it's all free. So when you walk into some of those theaters, you're in awe. It's just amazing. Now, the one theater, I don't know if you've ever been there though. Craig, is the Variety Arts Theater.
I want to get in there. Actually,
oh my God.
Have you been in there?
Yes. I was myself and 3 other people went in. We were invited by Jason Bloom.
Okay.
He invited us to come down there because he was doing a theatrical haunt. So it was like a haunted house with actors and things, but it was like over the top. It was amazing. Anyway, one of his actresses was attacked by an apparition. So he called us and said, he called us and said, "Hey, I need you guys to come down here like now." And we're like, okay. So, my buddy called me up and said, "Hey, I need you to come down here." So we drove out to LA. We were only allowed an hour, but in that hour we were watching it looked like a ballerina dancer dancing in the aisle. We're up on the main stage looking out to the audience because we're just taking pictures. We're like trying to kind of get a grasp of what we were where we were at and just trying to see what we can find. And this was because we all met up on the main stage, and then we are going to go back downstairs to the basement and some other, and then upstairs. And then all of a sudden I just saw this. I was sitting up in my camera and I saw her through the camera, and I said, what the hell is that? And then we're like, she was there, and I was telling everybody, hey, come here, look. And we're like sitting there just watching her. But if you look away from the camera, she wasn't there. You look back in the camera lens, she was there. Yeah. So we're all gathering around, and I was filming. We're all gathering around. She was just sitting there dancing for like 15 minutes. And then I said, is it just like an optical illusion, or is this really what we're watching? And everybody's like, no, it's a dancer. Look. And then so I said, I'm going to walk over there. So I walked down the hall and I was standing right there. And then they're like, dude, she's still dancing. And it's like she paused for a minute when you walked by, and then she continued. And then she's like, she's standing, so you're right behind her. And I was like, what? And yeah, it was really strange. So then what we did was we walked back down to the basement, and we're walking around in the basement, supposedly where the girl was attacked. And I was like, it feels weird down here. There's just a weird feeling. So then I'm walking through and I'm filming, and I see an apparition go by, so I'm just following it with my camera. It goes down the hall and just like drops down, like disappears. And then all of a sudden it turns into like an orb, and that orb shoots right by us. And when it flew by us, because we all saw it with our eyes, not even through the camera, and the lights were on. So it was illuminating its own light, and it was probably the size of a tennis ball. And as when it passed us, it made like a whistling sound. It was really, really I can't even describe it. It was just really strange. And it wasn't through, like, we saw an apparition through the camera. We all saw it with our eyes, but I got it on camera, and it was weird. It just, like I said, it walked away, it dropped, and then all of a sudden this ball of light just flew like right between us all. It made like a whistling sound when it went through. So we all went back upstairs, and then the actress came in, and then I started talking to her, and I said, hey, can you do me a favor and show me where you got pushed? And so she was like, sure. So she walked us back down to the basement, and it was right in that exact spot. She had like a booth set up where she was like a fortune teller. That's what she was playing. And she said, well, I was getting into the booth right here. And so the door opens, and she was showing us, and she was like, look, there's no lock on it. So I just have to pull it shut, and I have to like turn the little knob to lock it on the inside. Mm-hmm. And she said, so she got in there, and she said, when I was getting here, it pushed me in, and it was holding the door shut. And she said, I got scared, so I was trying to open the door, and she thought she might have latched it when she fell, when she was pushed over. But she said, no, it was open, and it just would not, the door wouldn't open. Wow. And so I said, well, let me get in. So I got in, and there's the door. It doesn't even shut. It's like just a prop. So it's just on a slight hinge, and there's nothing. The door is just like flimsy. You can just open and shut it. No problem. And I was like, wow, that's weird. And I said, so where did you see him? And she was like, he was right here. And it was right in the exact spot where I saw him walking by is where she saw him. And then I showed it to her. She said, that's what I saw. That's what I saw. She was like, and then she just started crying.
Yeah, the ghost stories that were there prior to your experience are similar. I mean, there's supposedly a stage actor that was seen on the main stage. Some claim that he, was Shakespearean or dressed in Shakespearean garb or whatnot. I don't know if he had the skull in his hand or what, but that he would disappear. But they made it sound like it was residual. I'm not a big believer in the residual versus intelligent thing that people tend to just automatically assume is real. I think that there's a connection between the two, but that's a worm for another, can of worms to open for another time. But my main point is that what you're describing sounds like it's intelligent.
Yeah, and it was.
And usually in places that have residual, there's intelligence right there, just like right there. So, I always find that always interesting how places seem to have both, or we think that they have both. But yeah, I'd love to see that footage as well. I think someone, Dawn, said, Rob, you should air your footage.
And it's so funny because there's so many people that were like, dude, you have like some of the most amazing footage and you just like archive it. You don't share it with anybody. But that's just me. I'm not a type of person that's going to come out and, air what I've got, like I'm bragging, but it's crazy. And Eric knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, so like with the variety arts, after we got in there, I tried to get back in. I called up the manager to get to see if we can book something. And I was going to bring a few people to try to come up with the money until she gave me the price, and I was like, yeah, there's no way anybody's going to come up with that, because they want $16,000 for 8 hours.
No, that's basically they're saying we don't want you there, but if you're going to be that stupid, we'll charge you.
Well, because that's like how much they charge, because I mean the theater, the building is huge. They have the main stage, and then they have 2 other stages upstairs. So I mean, and they rent it out for weddings and things like that. So
they actually do, because I talked with a guy that his name's Bill Towner. He's like the expert on all of the movie theaters in LA. It's just sitting there. The owners don't know what to do with it. The variety center.
Yeah. Now, that was before. But now they're doing renovations, and it's not even open to the public anymore. It hasn't been open for the last, I want to say 6 years. Since that was the last time we were there. I think it was 2015, 14, something like that. And it's been, after it was maybe a year later, they started doing renovations, and it's still boarded up. And it's a gorgeous building.
Well, no, it was a major theater. I mean, I know I'm not a historian on that particular building. And by the way, Eric, you said that was a space where a dancer got murdered. These are the kind of stories that I would hear, and I would go in and investigate, because it seems like every theater has a murdered performer, and so I always take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes it's true, but I don't naturally assume that is going to happen. That's where I come in. Is you look for it, because if there was a murder, it's going to be in the paper somewhere. Again, those are things that I think there could be a multitude of reasons for the hauntings. You could be right, but but that would need to be looked into. Let's see. I would love to get in there. It's right across the street from the Hotel Figueroa, correct? I mean, the Variety Arts Center.
Yeah. And it's right across the street from, it's catty corner from, what's that breakfast place? Come on, Eric, tell us.
It's not the Pantry, is it?
The Pantry. Yep.
It is the Pantry. Okay.
Yep.
It's been a while since I've been there, but yeah, I'd love to see it. That venue. What I was trying to say before I went on a tangent about, the dancer. That was a place that was like the main theater. I mean, Chaplin was there, but this was a venue where a lot of the silent film stars in the end of the 20s, when they were trying to break into talkies, and they wanted to practice their voices and emoting and whatever, that was a venue that often, showcased mostly forgotten silent film stars today, but back then they weren't forgotten. So there were a lot of silent film stars, on the stage there, trying to perfect their voices.
Yeah. And like I was saying, because I talked about this a little bit last week or the week before, and it was funny because when we were taking pictures and even filming, looking into the audience, it looked like there was flashes, like pictures being taken. and it looked like, and at some points it looked like there was people sitting in the audience. So when I took all these pictures and then I started showing, because like at the end, everybody came out and said, "Hey, what did you guys get?" And I was talking to some of the maintenance guys that will get there like at 6 o'clock in the morning and they, clean up the building, whatever. Um, I was showing like the maintenance guy the pictures, and then he said, "Wait a minute, where was that picture taken?" And I told him from the main stage, and he said, "That's exactly what I see." And I said, "So tell me what you see," because I only showed him like one picture. And he said, "It looks like there's sometimes I see people sitting in the audience." And then he said, "I run out of the theater and I bring some more of my guys because I won't go in the theater by myself to clean up." And then I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, it happens all the time." And then I showed him, I said, "Does it look like this?" And he goes, "Oh my God." Then he called his other guys over and he said, "Look, he got it. He got it." And they were like so excited that because nobody believed him.
Right.
Yeah. No, it sounds wonderful. Now, Bill told me that the place, they're not even renovating. It's just kind of sitting there.
Oh, really?
And well, COVID just kind of shut down a lot of things, and so I imagine that's what it was. I mean, when I talked to Bill about it was last November,
Okay. Well,
because
I
I
mean,
figured if anyone would know, he would know. But
yeah.
I think it's, you're right. They've got the boundaries up, and it looks like it's under construction. And maybe
But
they start.
they probably did that on purpose because of a lot of those places that are like that, they get what happens is urban explorers,
Yeah,
vandals, whatever, what have you, will break into the building and just destroy the building. So they
yeah,
made it look like it's being actively renovated. That's what I'm thinking. And that's what
could
I
be.
would think because with me seeing that, I'm gonna be like, oh hell no, the security is gonna be tighter than hell, and
Yeah,
there's gonna be security on the inside. With
yeah,
them renovating like they are, no way, I'm not
yeah,
even gonna touch it.
yeah. I would love to, research the real history of that place and find out, what shows, what kind of personalities were there. I'm sure they've got a lot of memorabilia there. But you're right, it was multi-level, um, stages, and I think they got everyone, doing guest speakers. There were women's groups that met there. Um, it was like it was a social scene. It was a social center, and I think I seemed like I came across Mary Pickford. I know Chaplin was an audience member; he wasn't on stage, but there were just some wild acts that would be there. I think even Amelia Earhart was there at one point.
Well, they did a lot of vaudeville shows.
Hmm.
I saw some old flyers. I mean, because I have a lot of pictures of that place. But just seeing some of the old flyers when I was doing more history of, okay, was
Hmm.
there any accidents there that, trying to figure out who might have passed there and who might
Yeah,
be tied to the building. That's kind of where I was going with everything. So I was
sure.
looking up old archives, like what you said. You go into to the LA Times archives and start pulling things up. And I never, like you said, I never do any research online. I always
I
look in
just completed the
archives.
Hollywood Roosevelt. I haven't written my
Oh
findings
yeah.
yet, but let
Yeah.
me tell you, what you've been told about Marilyn Monroe and the mirror and all that. Now that's legend. I mean, that's not true. I mean, that mirror, the Marilyn mirror, I discovered was one of the original mirrors in the cabana. There had 61 of them. That's the only one that's left, the full-length mirror. So it wasn't a gift from Fox. It wasn't a gift from Marilyn. It wasn't even Marilyn's favorite mirror. Marilyn was barely at the Roosevelt, but that story came up in 1989 that she was, and it came
Mhm.
up at a time. It first started in 1985 with the 100-year anniversary of Hollywood. They put a star commemorating Natalie Wood right in front of the hotel. But anyway, that what I want to get to is that there were actually murders and a lot of jumpers as well at the Roosevelt. So there's plenty of fodder to suggest that it's haunted. But what I thought was interesting is that there are stories, and here's again more of a positive thing rather than debunk, 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 debunk. The Roosevelt, there's a story about a 5-year-old girl that has been seen roaming around that place, the hotel. And I actually found an exact match. Not a 5-year-old that died in that place, but there was the long-term owners, again, forgotten by history, but played a major significant role in that building's continuation as a old Hollywood place. He had a daughter, and the daughter died at age 5 in a hospital from a rare disease. And now I think that's your number one suspect for a little 5-year-old girl that's been seen running around that place, because grandma was living at the hotel, auntie was living at the hotel, so she was at the hotel a lot. And I would imagine when she was scampering around in her, within her 5 years, she was probably treated like royalty because she was the daughter of the owner. And incidentally, the grandmother died in the Roosevelt, and the auntie died in the Roosevelt as well. Mm-hmm. So this family lost their hotel, ownership of the hotel in the 60s when the owner literally died. So I can't, again, you look for a emotional connection with a building. And it seems to me that when you buy the building or business in 1934 and you keep it till 1965, you've invested quite a bit of emotion into your business, into that property.
Right.
And so maybe that would be the place to look. Plus, there were just some really strange deaths going even into the 1980s that just get glossed over. But for marketing's sake, it's much more sexier. It's much more everything to just say it's Maryland, But truth be told, she was there maybe 2-3 times. She didn't live there. So anyway, I think we're running out of steam here.
Yeah, no. I'm just listening. I mean, it's fascinating just talking about all the stories.
I know that it's going to cause quite a stir once I release the Roosevelt info, because it's new information. It's just people have never bothered to look into the whole history of the place. It is true it was the first place for the Academy Awards, and that's what they used to market. It is true that Montgomery Clift did stay there during the filming of From Here to Eternity. Now they say he stayed in room 928. I'm still trying to figure out what room, if any records exist that was the room he stayed in. Right. But the ghost stories keep getting crazier and crazier about that place. I think there was some author that came up with a haunted Hollywood book last year where, Marilyn Monroe's ghost now plays the trumpet on the 8th floor while Montgomery Clift plays the bugle on the 9th floor. I mean, it's just gotten crazier as we get along. And so, I think it's time to, again, it would be valuable for paranormal investigators and tourists or anyone that just loves history to just kind of get to the heart of it and go, well, let's take a look at what might really be haunting this place.
Yeah, and supposedly he also haunts the silent theater, which is not true.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, it's so funny because I had an experience in the silent theater
on Fairfax.
Yeah. On Fairfax. I went there and I saw a Ryan Gosling movie. It was kind of cool because it was like a documentary of the filming of that, and then afterwards they showed the movie. So at that time, my girlfriend got up to go out to the restroom. So I'm sitting there watching the movie, and somebody came and sat down, and I even felt like the impression. So I'm sitting there, and then I lean over to talk to her, and then I'm where'd she go? That type of deal. Because the way that so for those of you that never been to the silent theater, they have these chairs. They're almost like love seats in the theater. That's the way that they are. So 2 people can sit. They have different seating, but it's almost like a couch. It's just like a long row but they're built-in seating. It's not, but they look and feel like a couch. So some of them are love seats, some of them seat like 6 people, some of them are single seat. So we sat in one that was like a love seat. So, and it was kind of weird because I saw somebody come in, sat down out of my peripheral vision. And then I leaned over to talk to her, like what was happening in the movie, and nobody was there. So it and that's one of the things that people have experienced. And I didn't know this until later. And somebody else was talking about it, and they were like, yeah, in such and such row, there's a love seat. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly where I was sitting. I never heard the stories. The only thing that I knew was about the gay couple.
That's in the main auditorium?
That's in the main auditorium. Yeah. So at the silent theater. And the only stories that I knew was about the couple that owned the theater, and one of them got shot.
Yeah. Well, I knew Larry Austin, the one who was murdered there, and I was haunting that place in the 90s, when it was literally a silent movie theater. Just for anyone on board that isn't familiar, it was a building that opened up as a retro silent movie theater in 1945, and it was just a mom and pop shop, and they ran it, and a lot of like long retired, almost forgotten silent film stars would occasionally pop in, supposedly, like Clara Bow, and that's the story. But it changed hands, and it ended up falling into the hands of a guy named Larry Austin, who turned out to be an ex-felon, and who might have stolen the theater out from under the widow of the original owner. And he had about $1 million worth of films, original silent films, in his possession. So he became like a local celebrity of the place. And he befriended and had a boyfriend who was the projectionist, another ex-felon. And the projectionist in the 90s decided to take a hit on the owner, Larry. So he found a hitman. If you love true crime, you're going to love this story. So he hired a kid to kill Larry Austin. So this kid comes in and try to make it look like a robbery. And during the showing of a film, the kid, tries to stick up at the concession stand, and he ends up shooting Larry dead in the lobby, and he shot a female employee who did survive. He runs out the door. The police come in. They automatically suspect the projectionist, but the projectionist has an alibi. He produces a handwritten note from Larry giving him his entire estate of like $1 million, $2 million worth of films, and plus ownership of the hotel. The irony of the twist is they were looking for who it could be that did the shooting, and they had a police sketch of the kid that came in and murdered. And apparently, in some like IHOP or some kind of Denny somewhere, a couple in a booth overheard this other guy saying, "That doesn't look anything like me," or something to that effect, when looking at the police sketch. They turned it in. They called the cops and turned in on that lead, saying this guy commented made a weird comment in this IHOP. So they arrested him. The police tracked him down, arrested him. He spilled the beans. He said it was the projectionist, and so they caught the projectionist. Meanwhile, the projectionist was like on TV. He was like Unsolved Mysteries. He was like one of the characters on Unsolved Mysteries talking about it. And so it went, after the murder, it went downhill. It closed for a number of years. People didn't know what was going to happen. Then another guy bought it, thinking that he was going to get $1 million worth of films, and that got a large part of that went to the UCLA film department. And so he bought this, and he tried to get it going again. And then that's when the ghost stories appeared. And one of the ghosts is supposed to be that of Larry Austin, who who died there. But that's the story. I mean, it's like it's crazy, but it got published in like some LA Weekly type thing that went out of print. And I've had a number of production companies for paranormal shows contact me because they want a copy of that particular article.
Huh. Yeah, no, there's just so many stories, and that's why, we keep on talking about different stories. Just in the LA area, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And I had to bring that one up. But yeah, if you're ever in LA, see if the silent film theater is open after COVID. It's a great place to check out. Just the vibe in there, it's really cool. It's not real creepy or anything. It's just I wanted to check it out because that at that time the story was getting out. It was a few years old after it happened. I remember when it happened, but it was a few years later.
Yeah.
It was a few years later is when I went. I said, you know what? All the hype has died down. Let's go check it out.
Yeah.
I don't like to go places when there's a lot of hype. That's just me. I just don't like doing that. So,
well, Larry was strange. I'll tell you that. I would always try to keep a conversation with him. It was most of the time it was like talking to a wall. He'd get a response, but he was about as stiff and wooden as you can get. But man, he loved marching down that aisle to Hail to the Chief or whatever the song was being played on the organ. And he made up this entire false persona. He kept saying he was like the son of a silent movie star. And it turned out all of that turned out to be completely made up. He was living like a dual life. And no one knew about his prison record, and I think it was embezzlement.
Yeah, it's just that there's so many sad stories out there. God, and it's weird. Like when I start talking or somebody else is talking, I get very visual, so I picture all these things in my head. And sometimes it just stirs up a bunch of stuff, but yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, I could picture that. So I even could smell the theater because it has a certain smell to it. It's not, smelly or anything. It's just old. So
Josh, you've got your Buster Keaton face on.
My what?
Your Buster Keaton face.
What is that? I don't. Sorry.
Your stone face.
Oh,
just a stone face.
People are joking that you're falling asleep. They're going, "Wake up, wake up."
I told Rob I have no experience in what either of you were talking about, so I'm just part of the chat room tonight. I'm just a listener, so I'm just the fly on the wall. Yeah, I'm actually not hosting tonight. I'm just.
But
Rob put me on camera.
But you're ITC though, right?
Yeah, ITC audio specialist, not an expert, not an authority. Just that's what I specialize in. Literally, that's all that means.
Okay. But he's an audio engineer by trade.
Awesome.
But I have not investigated at all. Period. Anything what you and Rob have done. So that's why I'm just listening and learning tonight. Really.
So what do you think about EVPs? Electro.
I don't know how to answer that. I think.
You think it's I mean, obviously it does exist. Even skeptics will admit that it does exist. They just argue that it's not a ghost.
I don't know that we can say we know what it is at all. I mean, we're getting information and we're documenting communication, but there's always the point of if that communication is honest with us in terms of what it is, where its origins are. We still don't know exactly what we're dealing with, other than like what you said, is that we do know that this exists. We've documented statistical modeling has come a long way in science to document this phenomena. So to say it doesn't exist is, also not accurate either.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's like with any type of spirit communication, it's really, we're trying to understand what it is. Is it an actual ghost? Is it actual energy, just residual energy that's there in the building? What is it? What are we capturing? So yeah, it's hard to say.
Right.
You know, when I see an apparition, uh, and I've seen quite a few. I mean, I'm just lucky that way, but I always try to debunk it. What was that? Was it just a shadow? What was that? I'll spend more time trying to figure out what it was than not just letting it go. Um, that's just my nature.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I found it interesting, like I had mentioned earlier, the basement of the Aztec Hotel, which was rumored to be a speakeasy, that you pick up the sound that sounds remarkably like a poker hand being spoken when no one's around. You know, that that is one of those weird things that it's hard to dismiss because the odds are very tough that even if it's a radio signal or cell phone reception or whatever the that the skeptics try to argue that that's what it is. Um, it's even hard for them to explain that. Now, obviously, every now and then you will get coincidence because there's a mathematical formula for that. But still, that's that's suspicious. And so I always love when you get these things that are revealing.
Right. Right.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's a location here called the Stagecoach Inn, here in Canal Valley. I'm in Thousand Oaks. So,
oh, that's Newberry Park.
Yeah, it's in Newberry Park. So anyway, it's still considered Thousand Oaks. Newberry Park, parts of Newberry Park are even called Thousand Oaks.
Very true.
It's very confusing. Even me living here, it's very confusing. Anyway, so I was there one time getting a tour, and I was doing an investigation incognito, trying to do EVPs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I went into one of the rooms because each room has like a different theme. So I went into one of the rooms way ahead of the tour, and I heard a classic radio playing, and it was like a 20s or 30s type of music playing.
Mm-hmm.
In one of the rooms, and I was like frozen, and I was like, where's that radio coming from? And the tour guide came in and he goes, what's the matter? And I said, didn't you hear that? And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, there was a radio playing in here. And he's like, a radio? There's no radios in here. And I said, no, it sounded like a 1920s, 1930s type of music playing. And he just like looked at me like with a strange look on his face. Then mm-hmm. There's a room with a bunch of phonograph players, like classic phonograph players. Mm-hmm. One started playing as we're talking on its own. And so the whole group like turned around. They were like, what that? So we all walked back over there, and he said, this has never happened. He said, this is weird. And so he said, there's only one phonograph here that works. And he said, it didn't sound like the one that works. So he demoed it. So you have to hand crank it, and then you put the needle down, and then it'll start playing. Right. And so the needle on that player wasn't even down when we walked into that room. And he said, this is the only one in here that works. All the other ones don't work. And he said, where did that, everybody heard it. Where did that come from? So it was just like ironic on how that happened.
Yeah, I actually was out there. I had actually asked, the Dawsons there if that place was haunted. And they were saying, well, the old place before it burned down definitely was, but they said, it took years to raise money on the site to put, a
right.
replica up. But they said that the replica doesn't appear to be active. So maybe I've been to that music room with all the music boxes, right? So I'm wondering if that is somehow more what you would define as, residual or whatnot. But again, there's usually something intelligent close by. That's that's what's weird.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like anything else. Is something attached to an object there? Possibly. We don't know.
Yeah, I'm not terribly a big believer in a lot of that the stuff. Like I think the whole ghost dolls,
Yeah. No, I mean,
haunted dolls, is just overplayed. I mean, I got contacted last year by a Travel Channel producer who, was saying, "Do you know of anybody that has haunted objects?" Because we're doing a show. And I said, well, no, not really. I have a hard time believing in it. I said, I bet you're getting a lot of dolls, aren't you? And he just said, yeah. Said, we're getting way too many dolls, and so we want other things. And so
yeah.
I said, well, I don't, if you really are looking for real haunted objects, there's probably not enough for a whole season. But I said, what you could do is, devote a series to places where things like pianos play by themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean the piano's haunted, but there are incidences. There's like a store on Hollywood Boulevard where almost on a daily basis the tote bags start falling from the hooks in the wall, and the tote bags aren't haunted, but the phenomena of things just falling, that could be more interesting than trying to find an actual haunted object.
Right.
And he was like going, well, yeah, well, it doesn't even have to be haunted. It just has to have a good story. We're not, we don't really care if it's haunted or not. It's just, it's got to be scary.
Yeah.
And then that's when I was like, well, I can't really help you,
No, it's just, there's so many, like I said, with the whole conversation tonight, just, myths and legends. It's so fitting. And it's hard. I mean, yes, I have some objects here that I picked up from locations that just appeared out of nowhere, but, are they haunted? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I've had some things manhandled by, something that I can't explain for my own shoots, props and stuff, but I would never, they're not haunted objects. They just get handled, they'll be in one location, disappear, pop up in some strange location elsewhere,
Yep.
And no one claiming to be around it. And the choice of where it's located is always so strange that you would have to think the person was deranged, whoever did do it, if it was a living person.
Yeah. No, I mean,
strange.
Yeah, I had a phone that just appeared where I saw an apparition of a little boy at Camarillo State Hospital in the children's ward. And I was kind of watching him. He was just appeared like as a shadow figure. And then we left. We came back, and in the same spot where I saw the little boy, a little Fisher Price telephone was there. And I was like, where in the hell did that? And we were all surprised. We were like, where in the hell did that come from? Because the way that the location is set up, they would have had to walk past us to, even if they were in that same wing, we would have heard them, and they would have had to walk by us to get there. So, it was just one of those things where I was like, wow, that was kind of crazy. The same spot where I was watching this little boy, this phone popped up. So it's crazy.
All right. Well.
All right. Well,
are there any questions that we didn't address?
Let's see.
I was trying to look at some too. I've been watching. I know that Wayne did talk about, and I was just talking to Josh off the record about the same topic, where we think it could be, psychokinesis happening when we are trying to communicate with somebody. Like with me on Saturday nights when I'm doing my EVP sessions, there's so many things coming through. Is it me helping project those questions out to the ghost box to get those responses? I don't know. But some of the responses are just remarkable. And then especially now doing reverse speech, it's just mind blowing. And then I was just talking to Josh about this too. I was listening to one of the because all of my broadcasts are recorded So there was a couple of clips that I wanted to capture for tonight's show, but we'll use them next week. And I was hearing responses that I didn't hear during the live show. So, and that's why Josh was saying, it's always, if you listen back to the recording live, you're going to capture maybe 5% of it. When you listen back, there's so much more that you missed. So I'm a firm believer. I don't know. I'm becoming more and more of a believer that that's part of it with the communication, that we're projecting something out, but who knows?
Yeah, it's a lot of this stuff is good. I think the thing with ITC, and I recommend this with just about any gadget that is out there. Gadget may be not the correct word to use, because I mean it's with Oculus, it's with mapping cameras, it's with whatever. But I think it seriously needs, and as well as psychic, test, needs to be tested in places that are pretty darn near non-haunted. The trunk of your car, inside a dumpster, some trash dumpster, so whatever, some place where you would think is definitely not haunted. Maybe in your own home, if you know for a fact it's not haunted, and see what results that you get, and then take it, into a haunted location and test that too. Because I think you know, when you break out these kind of gadgets, it's electromagnetic field meters, it's anything, even recorders, even digital recorders. It's always best to just try to just test them out, because they're on trial too. It's not just the location; they're on trial as well as to whether or not it's valid, or maybe another explanation will come up, an alternative explanation, and whatnot. But I think a lot of people will just take them and only take them to haunted places, and then when they produce things, then they think that the gadget's working, when maybe something else is at play, and it may be paranormal as well.
Yeah.
Me, my rule of thumb is I mostly deal with EVP, but I'm like one of those people that have like tons of recorders, and I set them up everywhere, and I make sure that um, you keep a recorder with you uh, at all times as well. So I just believe and believe and believe. Well, I have a funny story to tell you, Rob, real quick. I led a paranormal investigation with the Elks Lodge in Van Nuys last year, and I'd done the research of the place, and here's another case where the urban legend was that it was a children's hospital and an orphanage and all this stuff. Well, surprisingly enough, it's not terribly off, but it is off. It was Van Nuys' first receiving hospital. And the reason why no one ever found that out was because the address was slightly wrong. The address changed over the years, but it actually was a hospital, which would explain why they're like little children ghosts in what's now an Elks Lodge, right? So there is a story on one of the upper floors about a so-called murder that took place during a Union Hall meeting, where a guy was shoved out of a window onto the pavement below. I couldn't find a death like that in the research, but there were union meetings that did take place there in the 50s and 40s. Okay, so we're doing the paranormal investigation after laying all of that out. And we actually caught a really, really great trio of EVPs in one of the initiation room at the lodge. A couple that I know broke out a ghost box, spirit box, and they did a session, and they came across 187 came across, and they were going, aha, that's police homicide. And, there was a murder there. We have proof, 187, And so they rushed to put that on the air, on their podcasts and their videos and all that stuff. And what they didn't realize is that I had a recorder in there too. hidden away. And so when I listened to it, I heard 187, but it was part of the jingle for 1877 Cars for Kids with music, you know. So I keep that handy, you know, and I will show people that you've got to be careful when you handle, you know, spirit boxes and all that stuff. And these people should have known better, you know. They should have been able, especially living in Southern California. How can you not hear that jingle? But yeah,
play it all the time.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, that's one of my favorite stories, you know, about the dangers of using spirit boxes and running with evidence before just settling back and taking time and listening to it with fresh ears, you know.
Yeah, and that's why that was one of the big things of like I was saying earlier, you know, I would never believed in ITC, you know, using a ghost box, anything like that, because of my same beliefs. You know, you're picking up a lot of radio chatter, you're picking up a lot of things like that. And then where I had my breakthrough was at the Lincoln Heights jail. I was using a ghost box. In that location, you have to remember it's all cement. So you couldn't even pick up cell reception in certain areas. So I turn on the ghost box and everybody's like, why are you turning on the ghost box? There's no radio stations that you're going to be able to pick up on here. So I just turned it on. It was sweeping through. I was picking up nothing but white noise. And I was like, okay, cool. This is perfect. And people are like, what are you talking about? It's perfect. And I said that because this is going to prove the theory. If a spirit can manipulate white noise or radio frequency, what have you, we're going to get some answers if there's something here that wants to communicate. So I was asking certain questions. I wasn't getting anything. So I'm like, okay, this is weird. So we're having a conversation. I have the ghost box on. I'm having a conversation with other people in my group. Because there was I would take maybe 5 people with me. I would let some people go, and there was always like me and 2 other people. So we're having a conversation amongst ourselves. All of a sudden, we're getting replies out of the box. And I'm like, what? What did it just say? And like in disbelief. And they said, it just said so-and-so, like a name. And then I was like, and I had to like you said, I always carried a recorder. So I had the recorder just recording. I wasn't using it for EVPs. I was just using it as a recorder, right? So it can document whatever we're discussing. If we're hearing any disembodied voices, anything, the recorder is just always on. So I look at it, I write it down. So I always carried at that time I was using a tablet. So I would just jot down, notes. Okay, timestamp this, listen for this. And then, so as it went on, we were getting a lot of replies, just names coming through, things like that. Even dates coming through. And I was like, okay, that's weird. So I just started documenting everything. So then I started looking back at historical records, and I would look up the name, look up an inmate. And then I was like, okay, I found this inmate. That's what it said on the ghost box. And it wasn't common names. These are Hispanic surnames, not a common Hispanic surname like Hernandez or Fernandez or Garcia. These are like really like surnames I never even heard of. So they were very bizarre and very specific. So then I started doing more and more research, and I started talking to the facilitator, and I told her one of the names I heard, and she said, wait, what did you just say? And I told her, and she just looked at me like with a disbelief on her face. And she said, "You got to look up this. There's a story about somebody that was killed while the police were watching, and they witnessed the whole thing. And they didn't even do anything. They kind of turned their back."
Mhm.
So I dug up some records and I found the story. And then so I started finding more inmates, more and more inmate names that were coming through, and I just couldn't believe it. And I'm like, oh my god! So I started documenting everything, and then that was my breakthrough with ITC communication.
That's
And there
great.
was and there was no way it was coming from radio, because I even tried to break out like an SB7, because you can manually scan through stations. Like,
Mhm.
okay, let's try to see if we can find a radio station playing. We couldn't find anything. We even brought in a radio and tried to manually tune it to dial in AM and
Mhm.
FM. Nothing. We couldn't get a single station. So we're like, wow, this is crazy.
Yeah, it's always good to be able to corroborate, uh, what information that you do gather. I always try to avoid using the term evidence, paranormal evidence. It's usually just data that's collecting that either supports or rejects, a paranormal claim or a historic claim. And I always use history as a litmus test to prove, to legitimize a piece of data or a paranormal claim, and not to bend or distort history to fit the ghost story or to
Mhm.
fit the paranormal. It's like I think that's dishonest.
Yeah.
When people do that,
Yeah.
it's much better to use it as a litmus test. That's why I always say that having a subscription to an archive is like one of the best paranormal tools that you have, because a lot of times you can kind of judge a paranormal claim by when it first started making the newspapers, who was the one making these claims, and how did they change over the years.
Right.
Yeah, and so this is what kind of totally changed my investigations, or the way I gathered information or evidence. Was I did that, just what you're saying. So it's like, okay, yes, I'm getting names. Yes, I'm getting this, but how can I prove what does that even mean?
Right.
Yeah. So you're getting a name, big deal. But now if you can compare it to archives and to history, uh, and things are happening and they're correlating, it's like, okay, how do you even explain that? I have proof. Here's a recording. Here's the name in archives. How was that even possible to correlate the two?
Yeah.
So, and I got information out of thin air. There's nobody living there. Right. So yeah, I'm just pulling up information out of thin air. So, with that's like the best evidence that you can even gather.
Yeah, it is, and it supports the claims. It supports, it doesn't prove, but it supports the, the possibility that this is indeed paranormal and that the paranormal, exists. And that's what you're trying to do, is build an argument, because we're testing theories, and eventually we'll get enough information where it'll gain interest. I always say that if science ever proves the paranormal, it'll be purely by accident. They'll be looking for something else, and then something will happen, and they go, they're right all the time, just like microbes. I think they discovered microbes by accident.
Right.
But prior to that time, they didn't believe in them.
Right.
They just dismissed it as pseudoscience. And let me tell you a little bit about pseudoscience. All sciences start out as pseudoscience until it gets until there's enough data where it moves out of pseudoscience. But the big problem we have breaking out from pseudoscience and moving into a more serious thing are these fake stories, these fake lore, substituted in as ghost lore. Because as long as we still keep repeating false claims and urban legends, it just throws everything off, and it gives skeptics, all the fodder it needs to just make you look like an idiot, by pointing things out that aren't correct. So, I think it's important that we tighten, if we're serious about, trying to advance paranormal research, I think we need to tighten up our thinking skills and tighten things up, because you start closing the doors. Because let me tell you, those skeptics and the non-believers, their explanations, a lot of them are getting kind of moldy on their own part. They make these big, broad generalizations, like waking dreams explain so many different things, and it's really kind of a case by case. Some things are probably definitely waking dreams, but anytime you do a wide dismissal of everything, you can pretty much say you're automatically wrong, because broad generalizations rarely work, except for the kind like all human beings eat and require sleep. I think we can get away with that as a broad generalization.
Right. Accurate.
I'm just reading a comment here.
Yeah, I'm basically sleep typing.
No, it's just.
I won't use the word suck, but that is, you do have those two extremes, the ones that are a little too naive and have no filter and will just believe anything that comes down the pike. It's troublesome, and the skeptics, I always find them almost equally dishonest, because if you're a non-believer, you're not really a skeptic. You're just a non-believer. The skeptics at least have some kind of sway, where you can be persuaded. But non-believers tend to just know they've got their agenda. And what I find ironic about it all is that, the pareidolia argument, where they claim that, you just are hearing what you want to hear and that it's not this. Well, let me tell you, it goes both ways. They hear what they want to hear. They see what they want to see too. So when they're accusing the other side of doing that, they're failing to see that they too are guilty of it.
Right.
Yeah, that's so true, Katie. No, but I mean, what a lot of people need to realize though too is you have to be aware of your surroundings. Mm-hmm. So if you hear what you may claim to be a disembodied scream or somebody yelling or things like that, you have to be aware of your surroundings also. Because like I was saying earlier, when you're in downtown LA, there's alleyways, there's so many nooks and crannies between buildings, that the acoustics might sound like something that it's totally not. So the way that the acoustics work, so like on Main Street, if you hear somebody yelling on Main Street, it's going to sound like it's coming from the back of the building. And I'll use an example. So one day, we have owls here, where I live. So, I just have to be cautious because of one of my dogs is a Chihuahua. So, and he's small. So, anytime there's owls around, I'm always trying to figure out where they're at. So, I just want to make sure that they're not in the backyard or something, or, when not to let them out. So I heard an owl one day, and I was standing outside in the front of my driveway, and it sounded like it was coming from I have a huge pine tree up in the front of my house. Mm-hmm. So I was looking up in the tree. I was like, God, I hear it's so loud, and I'm looking up there and I can't see it. So I walk around to the front and standing on the main road, looking up in the pine tree. And actually it's coming from my backyard, just because of the way that the acoustics are between, my neighbor's house, my house, and just the way that the sound was traveling, it made it sound like it was coming from the front yard, but in reality it was coming from one of the eucalyptus trees in my backyard. So I went back there to my backyard and I was looking, and then I saw him up there. I was like, God, that was weird how the sound was being projected. And that was just me being, aware. And that's just me. I'm like that's my mindset. I want to try to figure out where it's coming from and how is that possible to project the sound. And that's why I was doing it, was I wanted to see how the sound was projected. But no, that's just my mind working.
It's important to do that. I mean, I can't begin to tell you how many locations where I was pretty much able to dismiss the paranormal claims. For instance, back at the Banning House Lodge, the main den, there are books that were written where they're talking about the sound of ghostly steps going up the stairs on this kind of multi two-level, main room. But I was staying above the main room in what they call the crow's nest. And when I walked across, or anybody walked across the crow's nest floor, it sounded exactly like someone walking up the stairs in the room below. And so I'm not saying that claim is a false claim about, ghostly people walking up the stairs. I'm just saying that there is the likelihood that might be an alternative explanation for it, because it really does sound like, someone walking up the stairs on the floor below.
Yeah. And that's just my, what I'm trying to get across is when you do an investigation, when you go out to a location that it's paranormal, that, have all these paranormal claims, you're going there to investigate what a lot of people do. And I'm not bad mouthing anybody, but I'm just saying in general, what a lot of people do is they just want to go to that location to try to gather evidence. And look at what I captured, type of deal. No, it's more than that. So you want to go in and try to figure out, okay, what are all these claims? Can I replicate what these people are claiming? What am I trying, or what is causing these footsteps? Is it, the foot, like what you were saying earlier, is it me stepping on a board somewhere and it's projecting that sound that's making it sound like it's coming from across the hallway? Because you have to remember the wood planks are super long and sometimes they don't have a lot of support underneath them. So just things like that. It's just you're trying to figure out what these claims are and see if you can capture the same thing. And is there an explanation for that, or isn't there? So that's part of being an investigator, not just trying to go out. Oh, look at what I caught. If you wanted to do that, you can do that all day long. I even go into places not even expecting to capture anything. That's how big of a skeptic I am. But then, I walk out of there with, oh my God, look, I got 15 minutes of a ballerina dancing. I got another apparition walking in a half an hour period of time. It's like, you know, and sometimes it takes people years to capture that. I'm not bragging. It's just, that's what I've done. So, and I've done that in many locations. I can't stay in a location anymore for more than 3 or 4 hours investigating. I just can't. That's just, I get bored.
That's why the photos and staging the photos, it gets your mind completely off of what you're doing. So
Right.
when a disruption hits, it's usually fairly dramatic. And, when I was, for instance, at the Alexandria Hotel, the Valentino Suite,
Mhm.
which isn't, I have to say this, but Valentino did not live there. It was named in honor of him in 1970, but no one knows what room he actually stayed in because those records were destroyed in the 1930s. But anyway, they just happened to pick a haunted space that they designated the Valentino Suite, and once weird things started happening, then suddenly the ghost story evolved into Rudolph Valentino haunting the Alexandria Hotel. But we had a door slam on us. I mean, it wasn't in a wind tunnel. It was a door that was wedged open, and we had tried to close it earlier, and it wouldn't budge because this room hadn't been restored since 1970, and it was on the top floor, so the tiles were warped. and this door just wasn't going to budge, and I didn't want to break it. So, we were shooting, and our minds were definitely not on ghost hunting at the time. It was just trying to get a really cool shot after dark. And then the leasing agent for the Alexandria at the time was in the room where the door slammed, and I had him shining like a light, on the bottle in the other room, and he was shining the light through a really small hallway. And he started calling out, "It's getting cold back here. Do you mind hurrying up and getting the shot? I'm feeling very creepy. It's
Right.
spooky back here." And I was like, yeah, right. Just keep holding the light. I'm going to get the shot, wink, wink at everyone else. And then that door slammed. And I mean, he screamed that the beam that he was holding was like bouncing all over the place. And 7 of us witnessed this. And it slammed so loud that all of the window glass on the floor rattled, and even I jumped. It was a legitimate jump scare. But that's what I'm talking about when, we're talking about those weird things that can happen. I don't think, I'm not so keen on like thought form type stuff. We didn't conjure up Valentino's ghost, but some of the other things that we talked about triggering, and but the problem we had with this is something that you had mentioned earlier. We couldn't do any EVP sessions there worth a darn because of the street noise. And so if we didn't have that one incident where a door slammed shut on us, we wouldn't have had any activity that we would have been able to notice or pick up on. But that was one of the incidents that made me a believer that the paranormal really exists, because let me tell you, that was not in a wind tunnel, and that door was not movable at that time, but it certainly became movable.
No, I've experienced the same type of deal where there's no way a door would slam, especially being that heavy, where you can, if I try with all my might with 2 hands and try to slam this door, it would barely, move maybe a couple of inches. But we had that, the door that I'm talking about, this was at Lincoln Heights, slam. And inside of there, there's no wind. All the windows are sealed. And for that to happen, and for all of us to basically jump out of our skin, and we're like, what the hell was that? And it slammed literally right behind us. So that's when I was trying. No, exactly. So I was trying to replicate it. There was a few of us, and we're like, all right, let's see who can slam it. And it would barely move 3 to 4 inches, maybe 5 inches at the most. And there was none of us could slam it. And there was a guy that was, bigger than I am, and he moved it maybe a couple inches more than I did, but we couldn't get it to slam. Yeah, it was just, crazy. And then, like you were talking about Valentino's house is in Benedict Canyon.
What's left of it? Yeah, most of
it's
torn down.
Yeah, but it was. There's a couple of haunted houses, and I'm not talking about somebody else's house that's there in that canyon.
I know where you're going. Yeah.
Who, I'm not even going to go there, but there's there's some crazy locations there in that canyon that I would love to get into.
Well, the story I heard about Falcon Lair is probably the same one that you heard, or what's left of Falcon Lair is it's the servants' quarters.
Yeah.
Footsteps being heard on the upstairs. I'd love to check that out. That would have been one place where Valentino is assuming that he haunted anywhere. That would be probably the most logical place. If he bought that house right before his death, and he spent his last year when he wasn't in New York and in Europe, he was getting this place all prepped for him to live there in the long run. and that there were, there were maintenance problems and stuff. So he was very hands-on in trying to get this house ready to like be his main home. And, his life was cut short. And so the house sat vacant. Valentino had so much debt, believe it or not, when they tried to auction his stuff, they didn't get top dollar like they thought they would. And while it was shut down in the late 20s, someone had actually broken in, paranormal scammer, hucksters, even back in the 20s, and they were holding fraudulent ghost tours, in the place where they were charging people to come into Falcon Lair illegally and conducting ghost tours. Now, people driving up and down, Cielo Way and Benedict Canyon, they would see lights and like lamps, in the windows of this house that was supposed to be deserted. So that's where the ghost story started like making itself known. And then the police finally caught the perpetrators and they shut the place down. Then there was an old cowboy star named Harry Carey from the Silent Age. He actually rented that house for a while. And his staff thought it was haunted. And he had weird people coming up to the door. Kind of like what's going on at the Cecil with weird people coming in and shooting. There were weird people knocking on the door, saying, I had a vision, there was a murder there. So, just making stuff up, and it creeped his cook out and some of his other people out that they moved out. Now, Carey was somewhat open-minded. He said, well, I don't know that it was really haunted, but it was weird. Then they tried to do seances, and, in the 40s and 50s. And with seances, and when you get a whole room full of psychics, nothing conclusive, right? So that's why I found it interesting that, now in 2021 and 2020, Falcon Lair has been torn down and the new place has been built in its place. But the old, like servants' quarters or above the carport or what a small little building, part of that estate that's still standing, is getting the footprints and the footsteps crossing the floor. So I find that interesting. That's relatively new claim, but still, I think it's worth looking into.
Yeah. So next door to.
Let me answer Samantha Beth. She says, "Wait, are you talking about the actual Harry Carey?" I'm talking about there was a silent movie actor named Harry Carey. In the 30s, he became kind of an older character actor. There was a couple of Harry Careys that are known. There's the baseball, I think, Harry Carey. We're talking about a different.
Yeah,
guy.
different.
Yeah. So next door to the person that claims his house is haunted in Benedict Canyon, I was there one night, and next door is an abandoned house, and this house is gorgeous. And it's empty. And so I asked, hey, who lives next door? And he's like, nobody lives there. He said, nobody wants to live there. Nobody will step foot in that place because it's ready to fall down the canyon. Yeah. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And then I said, well, there was a woman in there walking around, and it looked like she was carrying a candle or a light. And he's like, what are you talking about? He said, there's no woman in there. And I said, I swear to God. And then there was this other girl, because I was standing out there smoking. I didn't realize she was standing behind me. And so she heard me telling him what was happening. And she said, I saw it too. And I said, wait, what? And I said, you saw it? And she said, yeah, I was standing right behind you. You were smoking, standing with your hands up against the rail. And I said, yeah, I was. And she said, yeah, I was standing behind you. And she said, I thought there was a woman in there too. And when he said that there's nobody living there, she said, no, I saw a woman in there also. But he was like, oh, you guys are seeing things. And I'm like, huh, same person that claims that his house is haunted saying that we're seeing things.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, we've talked about that.
Yeah. But anyway, no, I just had to throw that out there, just talking
Yeah.
about that place. But
No.
no, there's a bunch of places, and Valentino, I mean, with him, supposedly being seen at Hollywood Forever Cemetery at his,
Yeah.
in the mausoleum. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I have a friend of mine who's one of the ladies in black, and she gives the tours there. I went on one of her nighttime tours. We talked about it. She believes in the paranormal, mind you, and she had an experience at the silent movie theater as well, and that's what got her, in the believer column. But she has not had any experiences at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery.
I've never have, and I've been there quite a few times at night. After the cemetery closed, we kind of just walked around, and security guard saw us, and he just said, "Hey, you guys have to make sure that you guys are out by the time that they cleared the theater out, because they have movie nights there. So after all the vendors are ready to leave, you guys need to make sure you guys are out." And we're like, okay. And he just said, go out through this back gate. He said, you guys can wander around, just go out through this back gate over here. So we did. And yeah, it's a cool cemetery just walking around, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, they definitely don't. The owners do not want to talk about the paranormal. I think they've gotten some complaints in the past when former owners did. And there are just some people that have family buried there, and they just don't want this kind of, they don't want trespassing, they don't want breaking and entering, and they don't want a bunch of people shouting out, questions, asking the ghost to perform like trained monkeys.
Exactly. But all right, it's getting a little late, so we're going to wrap up. And we just want to thank Craig for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you very much.
And
thank you
for having me.
Yeah, I mean, it was good talking. I know that this show is a lot of talking tonight and things like that, but hey, I had fun. I love sharing stories, and I know some people out there like hearing the stories too. We're always open for any topics, and more questions coming in, things like that. So this show's all about you guys. I know tonight it was a little bit different, but hey, it was a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Good information.
A lot of good information out there.
I try. I want things to be, better. And, I think a lot of places have closed their doors to paranormal investigators that were able to see so well. And it's usually just because people act badly. They go in and they shoot things and they put just anything up. And in some cases, it's very upsetting to the owners. I can give you case after case after case of where this has happened. And I think the best way we can actually give back is to actually just be respectful of the ghost, be respectful of the history.
No,
and just try to get things right.
No, exactly. And what I'm a big, I say this all the time. TV shows have killed the paranormal, because like I was saying this even last week, before TV shows even became popular, it was pretty easy to get into locations. Mm-hmm. And all you had to do was, like what Craig and I said in the beginning, you go there, you talk to the owners, you get to know them, you talk to them about the history of the location. You start with the history of the location and bringing them some information about the location. They're like, oh my God, really? And then they welcome you into their place with open arms, and you're welcome to come back anytime you want. And then you start talking about, well, have you guys had anything weird happen? And then the stories start coming out, and then you kind of ease your way in that way. Then next thing you know, you're having an investigation at their location.
Right. Yeah. Well,
that's how it works.
I know that sensationalism sells, but it also closes a lot of doors. And when you're talking about real paranormal investigations, you're talking about real data that's collected. You don't need to sensationalize it. It's compelling enough on it is. It's when you're trying to sell the fake stuff. And unfortunately, when it comes to the executives on high, on these networks, a lot of them don't believe in ghosts. A lot of the producers I've met that have worked on like Ulcer Files, whatever, they still will tell you, I worked on that show and I'm still not convinced that ghosts exist. And it's weird because that's not the spin of the show. The show is,
Yeah.
takes a very pro, but that's the problem is that you're having like cynics greenlighting these things, and they are just pushing. I always say it's kind of like scripted horror. It's horror fiction dressed up as a reality show. It is based on real events, and there probably are some real happenings there. I actually think a lot of the paranormal investigators that are hired on these shows actually wish that they could be, have more freedom. They don't have a lot of freedom. It's like a lot of it's up to the editors,
Yeah.
And the showrunners and whatnot. I wish that someone would just try a new approach and just actually just tell factual information and the truth, because that's the one area that the paranormal genre hasn't really moved in yet. It just seems to go further and further out, and their numbers aren't that great. No. Ghost Adventures has good numbers. I won't, but some of these other shows aren't, and I think they're alienating Middle America by going to the extremes to put out a bunch of almost conspiracy theories, rather than actual paranormal data.
No, exactly. No, you hit the nail on the head. Most of the good shows that I have seen, a friend of mine has a great series on YouTube. It's called Amy's Crypts. She and her boyfriend Jared, or her husband Jared, they just go to different locations around the world, and they go in. They don't false claim anything. They were like, wow, that was pretty interesting. Send your comments on whatever you guys think about this. Different things like that. So they don't even, it's just all on the fly. I talked to Jared a couple of times via chat. And he tells me what equipment he uses. He just carries around 2 cameras. One's a still camera, but he uses it for filming. And that's pretty much it. And then they have a couple of pieces of equipment that they carry, and that's it. It's nothing really scripted. But there's a few more shows like that, that are being shot and put up on YouTube, and some on some streaming platforms. But then again, a lot of, and that's pretty cool that there's other people thinking outside of the box, and it's not like anything that you'll see on TV. So none of it's scripted. It's all and they make it very interesting to watch.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. But has it been done quite right? I think we're moving further and further away from the elements of the truth, and quite frankly, it's just because the executives and the showrunners, they want to make sure that every episode they just don't trust the truth. They don't trust the reality of the situation, so they have to sensationalize it, build things up, put in false positives, even though they know it's false positives. They'll put them in the show for padding, and just kind of run with it. And that's just the nature of the beast. So, but anyone that's actually really investigated knows all of this, because it's not nearly as crazy as it's depicted on TV, or it's not even really as exciting as you mentioned earlier about, sitting in a space talking to yourself for 15 minutes, 30 minutes. sitting still. That can be quite boring.
It's very boring.
Yeah, it's like watching paint dry.
It
And
is.
I honestly think those laser grids that were popular 10 years ago was just eye candy to keep you from being bored. You can't really see anything going through breaking the beams, in most cases. But boy, were they fun to play with when you're, bored out of your skull asking questions in a dark space. Look at that pattern. Oh, the universe, to shine the laser grid. But yeah, but that gadget kind of came and went.
Yep.
There's still some people that use it, but I would always use it just out of sheer boredom.
Yep. Right.
Well, anyway,
right.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks for having me out.
Oh, no worries.
Thank you.
And well, everybody tune in Saturday. We'll have another good show. And thanks for watching. Everybody have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
Okay. Good night.